Okay, this is another episode of Narrative Wake, and it's in the off-season, so no one knows what the episode number is right now, but possibly 19. Who knows? We'll see. And could have just tied in some sort of edgy joke. I thought she was 19. No, we'll just do that. That's obviously something that actually is a shout-out to the old Riot Brunch Club. Anyone who knows about that back in the Season 3 hype. Most of you don't, because you're all fake. Not you on the show. Again, this is the part of the show where I self-indulgently address anyone I please. It's sort of like, like Jerry Springer at the end used to give that little speech. I do that at the beginning, before all the mayhem begins, I don't end with take care of each other. I sort of end on some sort of note and everyone kill yourself, So on this episode of Narrative Wake, usual host Thorin, usual sponsor of the show, Esportspools. And since the topic of this show is going to be about why NA has underperformed at Worlds, I could go with the obvious joke route that I would normally do when talking about, maybe a TSM or something like that. Haha, if you were such a fool that you thought they were going to do well, you could go and you could bet, or you could play fantasy and pick their players, or you could bet on their matches, and you'd lose all your money, because I am actually the only person in the world who actually manages to successfully maintain sponsors while pointing out to the people who might use their service that they will get utterly wrecked, and I indeed hope they do, and hope that in doing so they completely wreck their whole bank account. But let's go the other way with this one. Since maybe we and the collective community and the think tanks of the great minds out there in Western League of Legends, maybe we will find solutions and we will start to, I don't know, let's just use a metaphor like close a gap. And maybe in closing this gap, I would go with the other analogy. I would say get in shape and actually create a thigh gap. That would be a better analogy, right? At the moment, you're obese and you'll never compete in that sense. So I think that's a better one. Create the gap. That's my motto. Let's see. See, that's how you reframe shit politically. But the point is, maybe in the future, as we close the gap, it would actually be reasonable to bet on NA. And here's the good part. NA at all Worlds will probably come in with half decent odds, actually, because they've collectively done so poorly in history. And therefore, if they do indeed turn it around, you may, in fact, benefit from such a move. Now then, into the show. Usual host Thorin. Typically try to sort of use Godwin's law on a sort of 3 to 4 episode basis where I relate something to the Nazis, because it's just such a great hot flashpoint in history, isn't it? And in no way runs the risk of ending everyone's careers. See, that's actually the one thing, Kelsey, I do get a bit guilty about occasionally, is that at this point, I'm probably not going to end my career. If I've come back from the dead that many times, I'm beating Jesus at this point in time. He only did it once. And even then, he didn't do it, did he? It's just a story. I actually did it. And indeed, my return has not been a story, as everyone must deal with. But anyway, the one thing I do worry about sometimes is the idea that I will actually inadvertently end someone else's career. So, but then again, I do rationalize that by saying I never actually did that myself, though. That's other people who took that action. I was merely just sort of, not an innocent bystander, but I was a bystander nonetheless. And I just unfortunately couldn't save them. Because actually that's the one true tragedy in this esports scene, is that it might seem like I'm sort of a troublemaker, sort of a bad influence. Some would say a toxic representative who perhaps even introduces some sort of ideology and politics that is not welcome in the liberal bias media. Don't know who would say that. Just whoever they are, though, more power to you. Just get the fuck out of these spots, right? But in this scenario, I'm actually, believe it or not, the opposite. If anyone actually knew some of my background, I don't reveal a lot of personal stuff. In fact, if anyone wants to ever study how to become a brand, go and look at, I've done thousands of hours of content and loads of stuff like AMAs and stuff, and it seems like I'm giving a lot of information, but I actually very rarely ever talk about myself and my private life. I almost never reveal any details of that, and as such, even some people who've been my long-term friends in esports for many years don't know any details about me. So they don't actually know that actually I have some sort of a minor savior complex where I believe that I can actually save people and elevate them to new heights and sort of bring them along with me. Kind of like in the Superman movies where he lets them fly with them. And even though obviously logically they would die because he's flying at the speed of a jet fighter and they're just on the outside attached to him, somehow with the power of disbelief that makes people believe that episode 7 of Star Wars was really good, but episode 8 was bad somehow. In the same world that can exist, I somehow believe I can save us all. I can take you all with me as I ascend to the view. Now, unfortunately, that might be within the context of Superman. I might have to just shrink you all down like the city of Kandor and just keep you sustained and alive in my fortress. You might not get to live a sort of idyllic life. But here we are nonetheless for another episode of Narrative Wake. So, usual co-host Kelsey Moser. This time, okay, she's obviously been paying attention to you guys on Reddit, and she's been getting her Froskurin on, okay? Because what she does is she's realised that the secret to succeeding is you take the most hateful, ill-informed, just frankly moronic comments, and then you just listen to everything they say and do what they say. And then when you clearly succeed through almost seemingly your own talent and, drive and trial and error and learning from more successful people, it's probably just because you read those comments. So clearly Kelsey's improved the lighting game. The mic, again, I mean, we have stressed this. She can't do anything about the mic because it's not the mic. It's called her fucking vocal cord and voice box. Unless she can have some sort of extraordinary surgery, which I think is quite unreasonable for a talk show. I don't know about any of you guys, but I haven't made such a demand at least. Then she's going to sound like this. And, I don't know if it's just me, but I don't really even think about how people's voices sound because I'm too busy listening to the words they say and then the images those paint in my mind. Wherever that might take you. So the guest for this episode, first and foremost, I can already tell you that because he's from North America. Are you from America or Canada?
I'm from America.
Okay, yeah. So because you are from the United States of America, I can already tell you that you don't even pronounce your own alias right. Because I bet you're like, I'm Croissant. It's like, Croissant, aren't you? It's a French word.
Croissant.
Exactly. So there's no way you call yourself that. So we've set the stage already. Pompous name, trying to be someone, be a bit pretentious, But that's good because the key thing is you come from the world of Twitter and amateur analysis. And if there's anyone who should be pompous, have an unduly complicated name, and perhaps be reaching beyond their grasp, it would be someone from that field. My usual foil for all of these jokes, except when they come on the shows, in which actually, sadly, I usually give them a bit of a break and let them sort of explain themselves, because believe it or not, I'm secretly sort of a good guy. Some might say a saviour, tying into the other part. Right, anyway, so one of the ways I will just introduce Croissant here is because, he hasn't worked for huge teams. He hasn't done some massive series of articles. He's done some content online. I became aware of him through LS. Yes, Nick de Césaire, formerly known as Last Shadow, would like everyone to delete that from the internet and just be known as LS, and he was never known as Last Shadow. But I'm sorry, LS, I'm not in a 1984 type scenario where you can be like, I was always LS. You were called Last Shadow. It was a fact. It's just a fact. So LS brought you up, okay? And you have to understand, right? I always have said this. Kelsey knows this. People always put that mantle on Monty, that he was the Korean elitist and that all he did was suck the dick of Koreans because somehow he wanted to be Korean, or he just thought that, he hated Western people and thought Koreans were better. Okay, on a very, very minor level, there's a bit of that. But actually, Monty genuinely just enjoyed watching the best players. And in fact, a famous example of this is he did think Name was better than Deft and Imp in Season 4. And remember, Season 4 is when those players were considered to be the gods and indeed dominated the World Championship. So actually, Monty never really did go that hard towards that. Now, LS, in that sense, is the caricature of Monty that they do indeed portray him as, because LS does ride hard as fuck for his Korean set. In some senses, if he doesn't think he's Korean, he thinks he's the closest thing to a Korean. Put it that way. In many literal and figurative senses, believe it or not. But along these lines, when anyone has been recommended by LS, first of all, that means probably there's something intriguing about that, because he generally is quite critical of people. He isn't that impressed by other people, He often doesn't necessarily think other people's perspectives are as interesting. So I already had my interest piqued. But I will just say, I have set you up for abuse and possibly getting off on a bad foot. Because if your main recommendation is LS, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but think of the context of the two people on the show who are talking to you right now. But believe it or not, LS has a sort of a community of people who don't like him, and some people who actively dislike him in many senses. So, Croissant, why? I'm going to put you right on the spot with the first question.
Sure.
Why are you someone knowledgeable about League of Legends? In what way? Are you just been working in the lab on your own and we just haven't seen that much coming out of it? How have you caught the eye of someone like LS?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons that LS was really intrigued in what I had to say was if he watched the video that went on to Reddit, and it was the quality of things I was saying in which other analysts often look at the pick and ban, or they talk about the general terms of setting up your waves correctly, using your teleport plays effectively, etc. But I was going into very specific detail in like the differences between the map structure for blue versus red side. And my experience I've never worked on a team, although I have received offers from teams such as TSM and a couple of other big orgs.
I mean, they haven't really got the best track record of hiring coaches, but yes, other big orgs would be good. I agree. Big name, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You can dodge a bullet there, mate.
But for me, Thorin and I were joking earlier before the show started that, I'm like really young, 17, but I'm actually 21. And I've been playing since beta. And, but I've never, I've been on that track for graduate high school, go to college, and then get a job immediately afterwards. And so I'm in the third year of my college program. And I think where I got most of my experience in League from was just watching competitive play, thinking about it, but I never had an outlet to really express my opinions. And I first got my I started coaching and I started working with actual players when I played in a collegiate team myself in North America. And I assembled, the thing about the collegiate scene is that there are a lot of challenger players in the collegiate scene because the recruitment process just works like a college sets up a varsity league program. They give scholarships to people to come play for them. My school has no such thing, and so we really had like a ragtag group of people that I assembled all the way down to like Plat 5, and we had to compete with a roster full of like 5 challenger players, but we would often win series and take games and be very competitive in these leagues. So yeah, and there's a lot of other experience that I have in League, but none of it is really established and with an organization or open to the community's perspective. So that's why it seems like I'm coming from nowhere. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the reason why I asked you essentially what was like a simple initial interview question there is because normally, obviously, the guests on the show are people that, and have some, at least as journalists or something, have some known quantity or they've been a player or a coach. And usually I actually take the opposite approach. What I do is I do an intro in which I don't want to, pull back the curtain too far on the old fourth wall here, but I normally sort of just pretend as though they've done nothing, cite all the things that are shit in their career, downplay them, sort of to break the ice. Like I notice a lot of people, you can tell the people who have no social skills by they actually think that like is offensive and that the guest really hated that, where obviously the whole point of that, again, to reveal sort of the method here, is it breaks the ice and people already sort of can talk, and we've actually removed a lot of the pomp and the undue seriousness of having such a conversation about a fucking video game. I mean, I've always thought that was the most hilarious thing, that people have such strong opinions about the character of someone who is talking about the most niche elements of a competitive video game. But within your answer there, I thought something that was quite intriguing was this idea that, you were taking like teams of plat players and you were managing, presumably through like understanding of the game, reading of the meta, to be able to beat superior level of players, because in many ways that is the theme of this episode, which is perhaps NA with its, some would say, sub-par players relative to the elite Korean level, which qualifies for the World Championship, would probably need to go such a route in order to beat Koreans. Because here's an aspect I want to start with on this topic of why has NA underperformed at international competition, and I would add in the caveat, unless something changes, probably will continue to underperform. Because if you look at what's happened so far, it would be fine if this was Season 4. Because in Season 4, there were very few imports to NA. They were mainly like the odd Korean who was at the end of their career, or someone like a Bjergsen, a talent that just went over from Europe. Even then, it wasn't often the best European players. The Expekes, the Soas, the Frogans of the world tended to just stay in Europe because they thought, well, I'm going to qualify from here and I have a better chance myself from Europe. And actually, at the time, the money differential wasn't crazy enough to make a lot of them think it's worth moving to another continent. And then, as a result, when we had similar kinds of results back then, if this was Season 4, I'd say, okay, it's not the end of the world. There's a lot of things we could try. You could try, for example, maybe we could get enough money together in the West, we could actually import a really good Korean. They've done these things before. We've actually basically tried all the sort of obvious trial and error things that the West could do at this point in time. So where would you start this conversation, Croissant? Because I feel like, kind of I hinted at it there, the main area I think that anyone in the West has a chance, it has to be, forget about player strength, right? Even if you have Bjergsens, etc., Korea can always have a Bjergsen and above level. So they're always going to beat you on that level. You'll never make like a superstar Western team, which somehow then will win Worlds. But you can already see from the teams that have had success at Worlds or against Korean teams, it has to at least start with like understanding of macro and the fundamentals, right? Isn't this kind of like where the West will have to make inroads to then have a chance against top Asian competition?
Yeah, absolutely. The macro and the coaching staff and people throw around infrastructure as a buzzword often, but that gets into a lot of different complicated topics, and those are the things that need to be looked at more than player strength, especially since like if you look at the NALCS's upcoming season, player strength is there, and so any future failures will just be even worse than like what happened in season 7 or season 6, etc.
Yes, exactly. Because as you're saying, it takes away that excuse. Like, we didn't have as good players, Okay, so let's start here then. Give me like a big, broad reason as to why NI has indeed underperformed at international competitions, at Worlds. What's like a big one for you?
So a lot of people will actually go. So the community's first reaction to international performances or NA's games are that the drafts are subpar.
Yes.
And there's a lot of pushback on that from analysts and from journalists and experts that
no, it coaches.
Yeah, the coaches too, that it was not the draft. But I will say that I think that the drafts are a constant issue, and that, if you say that we had the right draft, but our team just didn't perform it the way we have previously, or that these drafts were just not executed on, I think that you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what your players are good at, what they're able to do on game day, etc. And so I think, although I'm talking about drafts, the context around it, and
yes,
the coaching talent and the coaching staffs, just like what they end up producing and what they end up conveying through to their players and helping them understand, that's just not there at all. So I would say the biggest reasons definitely draft and what the coaches are teaching their players over the course of an entire season or two.
So wait a second. Let me just dig into that a little bit, just to like further expand on what your opinion is there. So the question I have then in that sense is, right, obviously it can't just be that these coaches don't understand drafting or what to do, etc. Because there are, first of all, some Western coaches do a decent job with it, and then obviously domestically these teams get to Worlds by being among the best teams, and then typically within that context, unless you really just have by far the best players, you probably have to be half decent at drafting, if not good, within your region. So is it a scenario, for example, if I gave you this hypothetical, if I took Path and I took Reaperd, these are Western NA coaches, and I took them and I sat them in a simulator for the draft, and I didn't tell them who they were drafting against. I just showed them like what the other draft results were coming in, like, they banned this first round, what are you going to do? So in this scenario, they don't know they're drafting against Coma, and they just start to do it. Would they make a better draft than they do when they're on stage and they know who they're drafting against and what's not? Like, is the element of Worlds and pressure and these sorts of things playing into it? Is it like some sort of a failure to understand the draft at a high level that, for example, Korean coaches are exploiting? Like, be a bit more specific in that sense.
So in your example of the simulation, I would definitely say, yes, they would draft better than if they knew they were drafting against Coma, because from a lot of the interviews and the content that I've seen, although it's like very limited, of the coaches discussing what went wrong, there's a lot of this mentality in the West where one example that I just heard earlier when I was looking at some videos before this was, we didn't want to make it seem like we hadn't given it a shot at playing aggressive early, and so we just drafted what we thought were 3 winning lanes and a winning jungle, and we threw it out there. And that was fundamentally because it was a critical game for them to get out of groups and, move on further into the tournament. And it just was not the correct decision because of how you could see the other team was preparing in a different fashion where, oh, well, we know that this team is going to play towards this aggressive early game strategy. So we're just going to be playing a more safer and easier to execute comp from the middle game onwards. And like they just got read because of some sort of psychological desire to try and put it out there in their last chance, if that makes sense.
Okay, come on, Kelsey.
Okay, so which team specifically are you talking about with the last chance in terms of like picking all of the aggressive champions? Because I think there was a discussion on this, but it was more like a hypothetical that someone was throwing out there rather than what the coach said that he was actually doing, I thought, but it might be a different scenario that I'm not informed of. And then otherwise, I'm curious because people talk about like draft and knowledge like it's separate all the time. And you pointed out that like if they're drafting this way, it's more of an issue of they're not really understanding what their team is good at. But if the draft is a good draft overall and the composition is good and it works well against the other composition, would you say that the problem is still draft or just not being able to teach the players? Because this is what always drives me crazy is because I don't think you can separate draft from like overall understanding of macro because the way you play out a composition changes all the time based upon teams. So when people say, okay, well, this draft is good, but the team didn't play it correctly, like I don't think that that's a draft problem. I think that's a teaching and a coaching problem. That's not really separable in that sense.
Yeah. So I might have missed. So the first question, unless you guys really want me to like single out a specific team, I don't. I'm not going to do that unless there's.
I would never tell anyone to go out on a ledge, but if they already were heading towards the stairs, I would.
It's good to have examples, right? Like I feel like examples are important to discuss because I can't really answer you on this particular point or discuss this particular point in depth if I don't know which game you're talking about, I guess. And I always think that it's important to have that.
Yeah. So it was a tiebreak game between TSM and Misfits, and although it might have been a hypothetical because I was like watching a lot of stuff at 2 times speed, it was because it was stated that that draft was supposed to win the early game and it had like winning lanes, and I just didn't think like from my understanding of those matchups, and one reason that LS like thinks that I'm a good analyst is because I have played all 5 roles, and that's one thing that you guys have discussed on the show before.
Yes. He
and like
obviously
really highly
that a lot himself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so because of that, like I didn't feel like those matchups were as strong. And I think Hussein also agreed to an extent, but that was like in a different show. And as for your, the second part was, separating draft and knowledge. And I think that, definitely. You teach your players up to a certain point, you know, what kind of things can you fix? What kind of problems can you deal with? And one of the things that Parth struggled with over the course of a year of teaching this TSM squad that had already been together for a year, he felt that he could not take the team much further with like the same reoccurring problems. And I think you have to take that into consideration when like they're not just going to suddenly change their strengths on the day, on that given day. But yeah, I think that if you gave me any specific scenario with 2 teams playing against each other, I would give an evaluation of what that team did wrong during the season, like building up and working on their problems, and also taking that into context of the draft. But I typically evaluate the draft first, and then I try and see reasons that the teams should have drafted differently.
Okay, so then along these lines, then here's another question for you to again contrast against not NA. So we've got NA and we've got not NA, right? In this scenario where you're talking about, it was Parth's draft, right, that he did in the tiebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So when you were talking about that, right, I have to say when he said that, that also kind of set off alarm bells in my mind, because I kind of thought to myself, that's kind of crazy that in the tiebreaker of a world championship, your actual plan didn't involve a composition as far as I can tell. You wanted to give 3 winning lanes, and then I would presume, again, he's not here, so I can't ask him. It's almost like that's like you've admitted you've given up the idea that you're going to win the game from having a specific plan, and instead you're going with some sort of a, you think, safe, uniform plan, which, by the way, you can see how you would think it would give players comfort. The idea is like, oh, we're going to go back in a time machine to season 2, and I've given you all winning lanes, and if we just play that out, probably somehow win the game, right? Whereas this is what I want to ask, right? Yes, that's obviously quite an extreme example. I don't think most Western coaches are doing that, but without overly like glorifying Koreans as these perfect beings, do you think Korean teams in the World Championships like scenarios ever do something like that? I mean, as a naive Westerner, do they not surely come in always with a game plan of like, well, we're going to do this comp and we're going to do these things and here are our win conditions? Is it as easy as making like a distinction between the two in that sense?
So I think that, are you asking whether Korean teams make the same mistake?
Would they do something similar, or would they always come in with a game plan? Because this does seem to hint towards like kind of at least a psychological weaknesses sometimes of Westerners. Yeah.
So I think I would just say that the West is more prone to that particular mistake, but Korea definitely makes it. And one perfect example was the Tigers at IM World Championship in season 5. And people just, whenever Koreans pick something that just fails spectacularly, they say that these Korean players were trolling. But I think that the mentality in the draft is legitimately, oh, if I have Yasuo here, I think this matchup is really good, or I can pop off. And I feel like most coaches, Koma's been known to trust Faker, who, if he wanted to play something in a particular situation, but that, like, they trust a player who has played something, who has either played something so many times, in solo queue or in different scrims, and then they just like put it, it's a composition that they've tested before. Or it's a player that they know has like just a mentality that is unshakable and immovable. And I think Bengi playing Nidalee for the very first time ever, I think in the season 6 World Championships, was just insane, because basically Koma had forgotten to draft Nidalee, or to ban Nidalee against Peanut. And then not sure if that was World Championships, but it was a final game. And that's because they just trusted that Bengi, his game knowledge and his understanding of the champion, even if he didn't have like the mechanics fully practiced, they were all there. Like, all the pieces are there. And so the drafting takes into consideration, this is what my player is capable of. And I think that in the West, you have to trust your players. Okay. And I'm not saying that you can't just overrule them, say like, this is not something we do, but there's always a fine line between confidence, blind confidence, and then just like calculated understandings of how you craft these compositions. And a lot of that is prep work, other than besides like stuff on the stage and the draft. But I think what you guys have meant, the points you guys have mentioned about like specific compositions, is something that I've thought about a lot too.
See, I want to talk a little bit about that draft, because I don't remember exactly if that's what Par said in particular, but if he did, then it's weird, because I actually think this composition is fine overall. And even though it does have like good push with Karma, theoretically, and then Jace can win lane early, even you had like the setup between Ryze and Sejuani to snowball mid. I felt like it was more an execution problem, because you still have Kog'Maw. You aren't running like a super engaged heavy comp against a first pick Taric, for example. So I think it's like there is a composition here that makes some sense, but I don't necessarily think so. Either he was like selling himself short, or there was something else there. I think a lot of the issues with this draft was like, they have struggled a lot with playing two topside, especially on red side of the game. They've just struggled a lot with like their red side execution in general. So I think that for me, it's more of like, this is definitely an issue with execution. And so that's why I'd characterize it that way. But you would take it back to draft and say that they shouldn't be drafting compositions where that play to red side, to top side on red side, for example, if they can't do that well, or if they haven't been doing that well. And that's kind of your argument, right?
Yeah. And that's like it's just a strong opinion that I hold. And I think Hussein, the coach for Misfits, also said something similar, where he just felt that Bjergsen should be getting the counter pick, because not because Hanser is like a worse carry necessarily, although a lot of people would argue that, but fundamentally because TSM has shown that they can like translate that those traits. as a matter of the team as a whole.
They did actually last pick Rise, and they set up for the ability to snowball mid. So that I didn't check it when he had said it at the time, but they did end up doing that, and I felt like they didn't really play to that well. So maybe that's like for him why it came off that they didn't put the strength in Bjergsen, or they didn't make it work with Bjergsen.
The reason that I find a problem with the draft though is because I don't, even though they last pick Rise, I don't think it has enough pressure on Orianna to be considered a counter pick at all. And I think that he specifically said that he wanted Hanser on the top side to have like the pressure in that matchup. Although Jace was blind picked into before the Cho'Gath, but they were expecting the Cho'Gath pick as like. I mean,
Jace, you could just kind of blind pick in general, I think, at that point, and it would win any matchup. Rise, I also think, like, for that, so much about this Worlds was dependent on jungle mid, and so I think it was fine, like, if Sejuani had put more pressure on the lane, then it isn't about Rise necessarily having pressure in the 1v1 against Orianna, it's about making the 2v2 work. So I think that's where they were let down more than anything.
So one thing that I think is another good topic, it was in line with what we said before, but advancing it, of the concept of how good Western teams macro is. I always feel like, in a weird way, whenever you discuss like Western top teams at like Worlds or big international competitions, unfortunately the discussion is always skewed, I think in an unfair way, by TSM always being present, because they're always winning LCS, they're always qualifying for Worlds. And if you look at the history of TSM, it's not just a ridiculous stereotype that they've played a similar way to Reginald's vision of the game from Season 2. It's first of all true, but then secondly, they're also just a team where, if you actually look how much success they've had domestically, it's actually incredible relative to how little their actual like display of in-depth macro understanding appears to have been, because almost every TSM team in history has relied upon having good players who could win team fights. And I've always thought, this is a topic that people have never really put enough work into on the analytical side in terms of journalism, but I think the most underrated aspect of League of Legends is that once you get outside of Korea, where obviously they have quite a niche in-depth understanding of how to exploit win conditions, it nearly always will be the best default position to be the best team fighting team in any other region. Because even if you have a team that you're playing against who has pretty good macro, and they even have a comp that means that, you know, they don't have to team fight you, and they're even slightly ahead in the game, it's not a joke. People really can be drawn into that stupid 5v5 at a Baron seemingly every LCS game. And so I've seen games that were won in terms of win conditions, and the team sort of essentially, it's like the scenario in a cop movie, you know, where you've already got like the guy surrounded who's the criminal, but you know, like the end of Lethal Weapon, where it's like, fight me one-on-one. And it's like, you know, you'd never do that, would you? You'd never willingly give the guy a chance to win, but everyone does in this context. They all go, time for that fight at the Baron, and then they lose the fight at the Baron because TSM has some very good players, and then TSM wins the game, and in their brain gets to go, guess our macro must be decent because we're winning all these matches. But then they go to Worlds, and the mixture of better teams and psychological pressure means they're exposed as being terrible in this regard. So the reason I bring that up is because that's just TSM every World. It's like, there are other teams who either have like varying degrees of a read on the game. I mean, if you look at the Fnatic team for this year Worlds, definitely not the best team, but they had their own way of doing it. You know, they had their own approach, which once they could apply, worked. You look in the past, obviously Season 5, Fnatic, probably one of the best examples, they seem to actually have a fairly strong understanding of macro. Like, I think if you take aside player strength and region you're from, they were actually among the better teams at that tournament, including Koreans. So, Croissant, in this sense, how would you evaluate that, like the macro issues that Western teams tend to exhibit, in contrast again to Koreans, if possible?
Sorry, so when you were talking about Fnatic, did you say that they had good macro in Season 5 relative to other teams?
I thought at the time, relative to where the other teams were at, they were pretty good in that sense. Or at least if they didn't, they played within their own limits and didn't seem to display as many clear errors, you know.
I mean,
maybe Kelsey can elucidate it.
Yeah, the way I've always put it is that, like, Origin, for example, had a macro advantage going into the tournament because they were the ones who were bringing, like, double TP. And Fnatic had a macro, and a lot of the European teams in general had a macro advantage because this was, like, the last tournament where lane swaps were a thing, and Europe was a region that was, like, very obsessed with getting the bounce correct, doing, like, this very formulaic almost perfect execution of this type of thing. And actually it was, because I think I remember at this time, Korean teams were still playing like the hybrid lanes in lane swaps with support goes to top and things like this. And so they started adjusting to like the European formulation of how a lane swap should be throughout the tournament. So there were times like at season 5, I think was the last time where we had moments of macro that the West was ahead of the LCK in. So I think that that's kind of what he's talking about in that regard.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and even in specific, not just like West versus Korea, but in NA versus EU, a lot of people discount Rift Rivals as a tournament entirely, but the reality is that it comes off of the spring splits for both regions, and there's just different macro priorities in terms of what the teams have been working on through scrims, through preparation for playoffs, and North America just had a better understanding of the macro, which is a like questionable phrase to use, but it's very, when you go back and if you review the games, then you can just see these leads and like the capitalization on certain plays that North America is making. And so like the thing that I've seen most people give Korea props for, or these Korean teams, is just that they, adaptation. What does adaptation mean? It means taking the time to study each of the games from their opponents or from these different regions or their scrims, and not only knowing what these teams are doing, but implementing that into their own play. And I think the Korean players have more practice implementing new things, just like, the coaches drill it into them, where if they need to implement a different way to play the game from 5 to 7 minutes, then they can do that like in a very fast turnover of 2 or 3 games. Yes. But the North American coaches will not be able to teach those concepts, and the Western coaches and the Western players will not be able to teach and then absorb those concepts as quickly. And yeah.
I just want to say, I think it also depends on the team, the same way when we're talking about like Western teams depending on the team, because I would say Samsung is like really good at what you just said. Like that's Samsung's main strength. But I think Longju is a team that really fell short when it came to that. Yeah. At this Worlds, so
definitely.
Okay. Well, okay. I have another way to kind of phrase that then, which is, this is something I've always brought up when I was contrasting the Korean teams and the Western teams, which is that the difference is, I get the sense that when a Western team has a breakdown in macro, so there's a certain scenario where they're not sure, like, was I supposed to trade for the tower there, or was I supposed to go and actually fight them, or was I supposed to actually just farm somewhere else, When they're trying to make these decisions, I think that, just from my own experience, knowing people who were coaches and players themselves, they're actually oftentimes thinking literally of what scenario the coach said. Like, for example, I know when Monty used to coach CLG, this is the sort of thing they would run through, kind of like when you'd run through a chess game, someone had played, but you could have done this or this, They're trying to remember in that way, like almost like remember a flow chart of like, I could have done this and I should have done, like, they're trying to remember a recipe. Whereas I get the sense, at least from having watched, obviously, again, the very best Korean teams, the shit teams in LCK, I'm sure do shit stuff wrong all the time. But the absolute best Korean teams seem instead, it's not that they're thinking of what the correct answer is, it's that they have had given to them essentially the decision-making tools to actually in the moment create the decision and the correct answer, or an effective answer, at least. I won't necessarily say the correct one, but they have the tools to actually create the answer. They're not thinking of someone else's answer and essentially they're not thinking, what should I do? They're thinking, here's the scenario, what can I do? This seems like the best decision, let's do that. Which obviously is going to make you, within a game or between games, adapt a lot better, because you're going to have the tools to take care of situations you've never experienced before, very chaotic scenarios or some very unusual situation. What do you think of that?
I think it makes sense, because I think this is the thing that got a little bit confused when I was asking about like static or dynamic decision making, but it was basically like came down to this. Whereas I know that there are some coaches in the West that very heavily recommend, if this, then that, and then there's only like a finite set of rules that are taught to the player, and they aren't necessarily explained either because of the player's lack of attention span, or a lack of like a respect relationship between the player and the coach, or anything of that nature. Whereas like my understanding of what happens in Korea, which is probably like the most limited region, granted, is that there are actually days where instead of scrimming, they like teach teams about compositions, right? And then they actually are working to teach the game instead of just teaching like a finite set of rules that are if this then that.
And hence why, to allude to the episode we did with Hussein and any of the people who've talked about Korean boot camps, you have these stories which recur every year in League, which was like, we played the Koreans, and then first of all, they gave us all of our champions, and then thought we've got... That's not just to see if you're good on the champion. They want to like adapt to all the possible scenarios of when any of these things get through, you know. Okay, Croissant, what are your thoughts on this?
So, I think that this is a good example of... there's a lot of discussion also on whether a good coach needs to have, or a good analyst needs to have experience actually playing as a professional. And I think I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's definitely an extra tool that can make this process of learning adaptability a lot easier. And what that means is like a coach or an analyst who sees the game in a very structured manner doesn't have the fluidity that a player or someone who's gone through that kind of competitive experience themselves has, because like the whole thought process is different. Where, I mean, it's really, really useful for me to analyze how I think about the game when I'm actually playing it and when I'm actually experiencing, you know, gaps or mental blocks in, you know, what do I do next in the course of this game, and then reviewing the game afterwards and why was this a problem for me? That, you know, you don't. If you have a coach who doesn't play the game at a high level themselves, then they need to be able to empathize with that player, understand their thought process, and then communicate to them. And I think that's an extra step that's really hard to bridge. That gap is really hard to bridge. And so, yeah, I think the adaptability comes a lot from the coach's ability to understand where the player is coming from. And then, as you said, as Kelsey mentioned, the attention span of the player. How often do these coaches like sit next to these players and then like talk to them for really extended periods of time and just like understand how they're thinking about the game at every stage? I think there's like a lot of play the game, scrim, and then review afterwards, or jot down notes. But it like doing it in real time, like you can't just have the coach like standing over the player's shoulder every single scrim block and saying this is what you do, because then it doesn't practice them. But like there's like different steps where you train them and then you take off the training wheels and you see how they react, and then you rinse and repeat, and they develop that decision making themselves. So there's a lot of different approaches, and I just think that the West isn't trying them enough. They're not. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a classic Thorin abstract, not entirely related to League of Legends analogy for you here, which is that I don't actually think that this is necessarily wrong initially, right? Which is that if you are trying to, the metaphor people always use is if you're trying to teach a child something, you can't really sit a 3-year-old kid down and be like, right, here are all the reasons why you would never endanger yourself and why you would need to... You have to sort of, unfortunately, just tell a kid, don't put your hand in the fire because I say so. Just trust that I know what I'm talking about. I know better than you. Don't run over the road when the cars are near because, you know, again, you're not going to understand cars and traffic and trajectories and, you know, things like that. You're just going to have to accept my word for it that you don't want to do it because it'll be dead. And you actually have to sort of just be a disciplinarian in that sense, right? And so the abstract analogy I can give for this is actually, this is how people have modeled human history and civilization, and particularly actually religion. So what they say is, if you look in the early days of religion, most of them were these authoritarian, like Old Testament Jehovah type characters who were like, this is the law, you will do what I say because I am the ultimate authority, and you don't need to know why or what the reasons are or have any kind of like gray area. Just don't do this, do these things, I say so. And the thing about that is, if you're taking people who before barely had civilization and any kind of like understanding of how to interact with each other, these like very simple guidelines will get you from the point you were at before, which is very disparate and chaotic, to at least a very simplistic structure of some kind of formal structure of here are some rules, or at least we're all on the same page. Now, where that goes beyond that, And in fact, the structure you can classically use, it's actually used in occult circles, believe it or not, of like Isis, Osiris, and Horus, where Isis represents this figure of like, this is like the lawgiver and you will do this. And then the next phase, again, I'll update it with the religious version from the West, which is with Jesus or Osiris, is the character of someone they are the idealized version that you can copy from as an example. And this I would give as the analogy of the coach who is, you know that they're smarter than you. You know that they're the guy who knows all the macro stuff and all the in-depth stuff. And the idea is you're not just trusting what he says, but you're knowing that if you can get into kind of his mindset, if you can follow the things that he suggests and some of his reasoning, now at least by trying to emulate him, you will become hopefully a better person, an idealized person, because at least the example's very, very good. Now the problem is the third step, okay? So the reason why I gave the occult example, it's one of the few ones that actually has a third step, which is the idea of Horus, who is actually in that mythology is actually considered to be a child, and he's kind of like a trickster god. So in that setting, what's happening there is you're no longer like just doing something because someone said so, and you're also not just copying someone else because you think they're better. You're also now trying to, in theory, actually be a grown-up and be able to gauge, because also the other metaphor people use is like child, teenager, adult. You're now trying to gauge what of the things that this person tells me are good and would apply to me, what of them aren't, and I can then discard them entirely. Now, the reason I can't use the Jesus one there is, this might sound like a controversial statement, but Christianity actually hasn't moved beyond that. They kind of got stuck in a little cul-de-sac called Jesus. So in this scenario, I don't really know in a Western scenario that anyone's ever gotten to that level, that they've actually been able to teach players, like, here are all my thoughts and here are the reasons why, and here are even my flaws of where maybe I don't know stuff. You guys take as much of that as you can, and then hopefully, if you're a fantastic player, you even sort of bridge the gap yourself. You put in the extra elements that I don't have and make decisions for yourself in the game. And at least as far as this model goes, that would be in theory the pinnacle of what you could do. So as you notice there, what I've done is I've built into that what is often, I think, the missing step in how Westerners think of Koreans, which is they either think they're so sick mechanically at the game that they can do more than us. Well, not quite, yes, in certain cases, but not quite, because as I've alluded to in the past, Kuro could have won like 3 world championships, and in no sense was he a mechanical god, contrasted even to Bjergsen, But at the same time, yes, clearly their coaches are fantastic and are doing a really good job training them, but you could even have that with Westerners as well. The problem is, and this is one of the things that actually I'll give Ellis credit for, he's one of the only people who actually ties the two together. It is simultaneously that Koreans are not only coached better, but then they can kind of meet the coach halfway with their understanding of the game and the roles themselves, and they can kind of take what the coach says, and they're the ones who carry it the last step. So hence, if you import just the Korean, you won't have any of the other aspect where he can meet you halfway. If you import the Korean coach, you won't have the player who can implement what he says. And as far as I can tell, this is like a clear area where the West hasn't really evolved or somehow hasn't gotten to that level.
And I think it's fair to have rules in general, but it's like you have to understand to an extent why the rules are in place or where they're coming from, because I think it's just human nature to create rules that you can go back to or to experience. If you're playing the game a bunch of times, you will draw on your experiences, yes. Right? So I think that that's not necessarily the criticism I'm levying. Also, I just want to point out that it's like you do have to have some element where they can make decisions for themselves, and maybe you have to change your coaching method all the way from like a completely authoritarian aspect to a, now kids, what do you think of this situation, like sort of set up so that they're solving the problems themselves. I mean, it just comes down to like what is the approach that we're taking, and have we tried enough different ones to say that our approach is good and we should just be improving on it, or to say that we need to try something completely different, I guess.
Are you thinking? Are you going to jump in, Croissant?
Yeah, I was going to say that if you look at okay, so now we're talking about the players, and I had never heard that Ellis talked about like the players meeting them halfway, but I think that's a really...
Well, his suggestion was that players, he thinks one of the reasons why Koreans are advanced, because I kind of broke the same scenario down to him. Like, if it's just coaches, let's import Coma, right? But his point was that he thinks that because Korean players, his theory is that they know the roles better than Western players. Like Bjergsen, in his mind, probably only knows mid lane, whereas to him, someone like Mata knows support and probably some elements of top lane, and also definitely AD carry, and hence when he then makes in-game decisions along with what he's being coached for, he has an ability to view the game almost kind of from a coach's perspective himself on a miniature level, whereas he saw that as like a difference in evolution that Westerners don't generally have.
Yeah. So I would say that the interesting thing about that is not like, I think players like Bjergsen understand their own role really well in a team. And like, I've seen Bjergsen make attempts to, he plays mainly mid, but he does like put a lot of time into like learning jungle, because jungle has like when you play jungle, you learn the gank timings, you learn the warding spots, and those are especially important for the mid lane. But players like Mata, players like Core JJ, they're renowned not only for their ability to role swap or their ability to grasp like different the role of each player in the team, but also to communicate that and to make a decision really proactively, as people will say. And I think they empower their teammates in that way. And so Bjergsen's a very solid rock. But the reason that TSM brought on Mike Young, for example, is that he's the only rookie that I've seen in like at least a couple of years in North America. Maybe I'm missing someone. Like Bifrost is hard to tell because he like went through training with, Double Lift, and he had like that connection for so long. But Mike Young talks about the game constantly. If you watch him stream, he communicates in a way that I haven't seen any other pro like express their thoughts. And it's not like at a significantly higher level than like other pros or other people in North America. All I'm saying is that he has that capacity for leadership and communication. And he also like coached a team for a week when they were doing the scouting grounds, when they were building, when they were scouting out players in North America for new talent. And so I think a lot of those factors go into, it's not just throw your player. I would make every player play a certain amount of like support, AD carry, etc. games, depending on what I felt they were really lacking knowledge in. But it's not the only thing that's separating a North American player from a Korean player in terms of meeting the coach halfway. Yeah. And I think if you look at the teams like Samsung and SKT, not all of the players, not every piece will be able to do what I was just talking about. But the players that don't, like Crown and Ruler, perhaps, they like excel in different areas, which is just like destroying solo queue, like putting in so much effort, learning every single matchup, being able to role play like as Malzahar or these specific picks. And those are things that I also really value, because I feel like one of the things I've always been best at is just predicting how the meta moves, like the picks before other people do. And that just gives you an advantage because, you're always like, that's the only time in League that you can really be steps ahead of the opponent, is just reading the game as it transforms. Because once you've drafted everything and you're in game, like there's only so much you can do to like predict where the other team is going to move in a macro sense. But I think it's really, really important for Western teams to look at how to enhance their prep work in the way that Korean teams do. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a good question along these lines then, Kelsey. I wanted to get your thoughts. Do you have anything key to add to that, by the way?
I just wanted to say that I also think, like, I know that LS likes to separate this in Korean versus Western and stuff, but I just like, I ask a lot of, like when I do interviews, I like to ask players about something happening in a different lane or a different like matchup or something that was in their game to see kind of like where they are on that level. And there are a surprising lot of Western players who will be able to like break down the matchup happening in a lot of matchups happening in top lane. And then at the same time, there will be Korean players who will be like, I don't know, he thought this champion was good into this champion and I don't know why. So I think it really depends. Like Mithy, for example, is a player that's praised ridiculously for being able to teach every single role, all of this sort of thing. So I think it really does depend a lot on the player. And so far for me, like I obviously haven't interacted with the Korean scene as much as LS, but I don't see like enough evidence to say that this like learning every role is really what is keeping the West behind, I guess.
Okay. Right. Anyway, so to carry on Croissant's point there, When he said that about like you trying to read the meta, and in his example he gave was like, for example, if you had like an off meta pick that no one knew, or was one where, for example, it wasn't just good because you play it, but it's good as maybe some weird counter, right? As a general broad strokes aspect, it does feel like that's an area where Korea is just ahead of, I would say, everyone except LPL, because I'll actually give credit to LPL because they've always stuck with their own internal meta largely. Sometimes they just happen to come up with these, but they don't actually know that they're counters. They just happen to be what they do anyway, and it turns out to work, right? So they're not entirely going the full hog on that one, but they're getting it in indirectly. But obviously it is very, very famous in the West, in Europe and North America, that unfortunately part of the institution of coaching and the evolution of coaching was, how do we sort of reverse engineer what Koreans are doing, and it famously did become, let's become slightly worse versions of Koreans who probably don't entirely know what they're doing. And this is one area where I have always given credit to the original patriarch of North American League of Legends, which is Chowster, where he was absolutely on the money from day one, but in the wrong sentiment, which is the reason why he thought that Koreans wouldn't be ahead, and there was no point copying Koreans, is because he always said, and this is absolutely, I think, an ironclad point, he always said, if you copy Koreans, you will always be copying, you will always be following. What you should always be doing is, no matter who you're playing, be seeking to you should be the one innovating, making the new read on the meta. Now, unfortunately, as with every piece of wisdom in the world, it will always be ruined by people who think that the character or the outcomes of the life of the person giving the wisdom somehow shows you how valid the wisdom was. It doesn't really, unfortunately. You know, you can make a very shrewd point like he did and still do a load of weird shit at Season 2 Worlds, which seems very gimmicky and didn't really work and didn't make a lot of sense. That doesn't change the fact that his principle was pretty bang on the money now. Now, the question I want to ask you, Kelsey, to kind of open this topic up is, aside from the weird sort of caveat where, if you notice by that Misfits episode, we never really got a firm answer on whether or not Ignar indeed did do this and countered the meta or not, because I get the feeling, unfortunately, that Hussein didn't want to throw Ignar under the bus of like, well, yeah, he was in a way countering it, but also, real talk, homie, he couldn't have just played Janna and fucking Lulu and done anything in the game. So he obviously couldn't say that for reasons that we can all understand. But aside from that weird sort of side one, can you think in the last few Worlds, have there been any examples of where Westerners did a good job at this, trying to read the meta or anticipate the meta or introduce something new themselves?
I mean, like I said, I think the best example is still the 2015 Origin and Fnatic and what they brought. And I think a lot of credit, even though H2K were not that good by the time that Worlds rolled around, but a lot of the credit went to the way H2K were setting up and teaching lane swaps to the region that year. So I think that those three teams definitely had a mark and were supposed to be there. I'm trying to think, 2016, I felt like, for the most part, a lot of the Western teams were not really doing a lot of different things. Like, I guess the most you could say again would be like the H2K strong top and mid lane, bottom lanes that were kind of sort of became part of the trend of Worlds over time. But there wasn't really anything that really jumped out to me that the Western teams were really doing this year or last year.
Because it does feel like Koreans are always the ones who come up with that thing. Like, obviously, a very famous kind of gimmick example was last year's World, Season 6 Worlds, where the Samsung team came up with the MF bot lane as fucking support or whatever it was.
I think so. Yeah.
That's like a good gimmick example, you know. But aside from that, I can't really think of many that were Westerners ever doing. What do you think on this, Croissant? So, I think it was Gorilla who pulled out the misfortune against Zyra as a specific counter. But I think that the example that came to mind just now when Kelsey was talking about Season 6 was Afro pulling out Mage Sports in MSI, which was like a big meta shift. And that extended into the later parts of Season 6 as well. And I think just like the simple truth of it is that every region will stumble upon something. Like, I mean, you can even have wildcard regions bringing in their own special compositions that I really like. Like, I liked Gigabytes bringing out Rengar, Zillion, etc. And there's always stuff that I've tried to theory craft as well. But Korea will just do it more often because the solo queue is a great place. The solo queue is a great place to like find those gems. And Korean solo queue has like people, like when people knock on North American solo queue, they knock on like
shitty one tricks that once you ban them out, they just run it down and die all the time. But Korea has like a lot of one tricks as well.
Sure, yes.
And Masters and above. And, but yeah, I think Korea will just stumble on these things more often, and they won't take as long to pick up the other like major supports that if North America brings it up, or double TP by Europe. So, yeah.
See, I actually disagree, because I think historically, especially pre the BO3 era or whatever, the Riot League era, Korean teams were really hesitant to sort of pick up something, even if they were playing it a ton in solo queue, right? And then they would stick to like these picks almost fixatedly. And I think you see maybe a more even mix of one-off things that come to the table from the West and China than just Korea. Like a lot of the Korean teams put emphasis on like the way that the Chinese teams were playing around bot as something that was really illuminating for them. Europe was the one that it wasn't just Misfits. There were like a lot of European teams playing engaged supports and scrims like Mythy and things like this. So I do think that there are, like, if you look at examples of specific things that have altered the meta over the course of the tournament, I think it's not true that Korea has had the most examples. I actually just don't think that that's true at all. But I think that it's also not fair to say that like it's a mostly Western or Chinese thing. I think it's a fair mix.
But
the other aspect of it, though, is one thing that I found really weird, though, when you talk to, like, you say like you talk to a coach of a team and then you talk to the player. The coach, and this again comes down to the understanding, like, say that a team plays like an interesting pick in a game, and you ask the coach, like, why did you guys draft this pick or whatever? And the coach will say, well, we think it's good for this, this, and this reason, and we've been practicing it for a while. And then the player will say, well, SKT played it yesterday. It's almost like they don't, like, the players want to hold up Korea as something that, like, is immutable, almost because they don't trust their own staff or their own team. Yeah. And then, so I think it's sometimes just easier to convey it as this information, or that's the information that they retain, is that maybe you've been trying to convince this team for like weeks that this pick that you're trying in scrims is something you should play on stage. And the point that sticks home with them is, well, SKT played it. So I think it's almost like fair to say that this kind of mentality has been holding back what could have been like a more even mix of, or what is generally in my head when I see what happens at Worlds, a more even mix of people bringing things to the stage that are interesting.
Okay, then what about this? What if we change the premise to, if Korea isn't the first to make the innovation, well, within the context of reading the meta, they clearly adapt quicker than the other regions.
Yes.
Would that be a fair statement?
That's always the thing that I think is what you take home, is that their understanding of like when they see these picks and how to change up their game and incorporate stuff that they see that they like is better. Like, they don't have to bring the thing first if they will learn it quickly and incorporate it. So I don't actually even think they think it's worthwhile to be the ones to do stuff first, you know? So
this is why I've always made as a very key point, especially the last couple of years, because it's been even more apparent to me, because finally we're getting occasional upsets of Korean teams, you know, like, remember at the MSI you're referring to for Aftermu, they beat SK Telecom. It was actually mind-blowing that it happened, but you know what, by the time they got to the final, it didn't fucking matter, and that was only like 3 days later or something, you know, but you would think it was a year later the way it went, you know, like, you'd think that they'd gone into the hyperbolic time chamber and studied everything about CLG and came out like, right, there's the answer. What do you mean there's the answer? That's the solution to CLG, right? So now we beat them. So I've always made the point, right, that when you're talking about such a broad topic as this, like, why does Korea do better, even if it's not in the context of NA, right? One of the main reasons why is, look at the format of their competition they play, where you have all this time, like, I mean, now we finally got it in the West, but we didn't used to have it. We used to play, like, you know, quarterfinals one day, semi-final the next day, the final the day after that. And here's the funny thing. If you just look in history, you already could beat Koreans doing that. That's what Gambit did. That's what teams did in the past, where if it was a 3-day tournament like the one, that IEM that Gambit won, yeah, you can beat a Korean tomorrow, because he doesn't have time to adapt to everything you're doing, because he's not a robot who just perfectly reads the game. Yeah. But you give him a whole week, Yeah, he's probably going to come up with a lot of good solutions or a few good answers or some reads. And the problem there is that's, for me, where there's a big gap between Korea and the West. Because I've always said at Worlds, you absolutely have a chance to beat the Koreans in the group stage, right? Remember, the second part of the group stage is always played on one day. You play all 3 games on one day. They can't even necessarily watch all your games as you go, because they might be playing like just after or just before. But if you get to the quarterfinals and play a Korean team, good luck. Like, they've got like a week to fucking go ham, whereas I don't know what the Westerners do in that week, but it feels like they don't do much different. Like, they just get 7 days worth of one-day practices, if the analogy holds, you know. What do you think on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think
like what is the flaw in that sense? What do Westerners need to change in that sense?
I guess, yeah, for me, it's just that is the main puzzle, right? What is the flaw? It's like we already put one hypothesis forward, which is that there needs to be like a better approach to how we teach the game and changing like the structure of how we teach the game. Are we thinking of coaching as teaching the game itself, or giving an instruction manual on if this, then that, or it depends a lot on that, because we don't specifically know what the Korean teams are doing right.
Exactly,
right?
Yes.
But we just know that what we're doing, there's like a lot of holes in it. So,
and by the way, it even works against Koreans. Like I guarantee you, if this was like an old school esports tournament where, you know, it takes place over like 3 or 4 days and you just play day to day to day, the Samsung that loses in the group stage to RNG doesn't then just go and wreck Longju the next day. You know, that takes time, and there's an evolution of thought there and preparation that they then came up with something, probably as a result of their losses, and then having time to study. You know, that doesn't happen even for Samsung. So we're talking about the exact same teams in different circumstances wouldn't do it, and it works against Koreans is the key point I'm making. So if Westerners can figure out any of this stuff, they will start to make inroads.
I also think it's like I've heard of like some of the stuff that's discussed in scrim breakdowns. Like, scrim structure is usually like, okay, play a game, 15-minute or whatever breakdown, play another game, 15-minute or whatever breakdown. And some of the stuff that's like, you have to be selective of what you choose in between games, right, to discuss. And that's kind of why I was almost like really surprised to hear that Parth and Youngbuck were looking at like mechanical or single mistakes that players made and like laughing at them. Not necessarily that this is specifically what they said, or like the team was like pointing this out and bullying them for this, because it's like, I feel like you have to be thinking about what you're going to break down and how can you make this something that they can apply, right? You can't just say this is what you should have done in this specific game. You have to say this is what you should have done. Because they might never
be in that scenario again, right?
In this specific game, and this is why, and this is how you can like apply it to other scenarios in some way. So I don't know if that's like something that they're not doing, but it's an interesting question. So.
Yeah, to look at the efficiency between each week, I don't think the answer is to necessarily make the NALCS format the same as, you know, the working up the gauntlet the way that the Korean teams do each day after the next. I think that would be helpful in building mental resilience, but there just has to be other ways to structure your practice that you learn how to adapt faster and you go into that crunch time. And I think Is this a
significant factor for you, though, personally? Is it something that you would have picked as a key factor that's holding the West back, and NA particularly?
I would definitely say adapting week to week is a huge problem and symptom that I see for NA. The reason I didn't bring it up or discuss it is because I can't discuss the cause of that symptom.
Yes.
You know, I can't see what kind of preparations these teams are doing. That is just like, because as you said, TSM takes away from a lot of, or it becomes the focus point of a lot of the Western performance or North America's performance internationally. But like, Immortals was 2-1 their first week, and then they lost 4 games. And they had supposedly the best coaching staff of North America.
And they didn't even have a jungler they could blame. In theory, the jungler was the best player in the team.
Yeah, Smithy was doing great. So it's just really, you know, I think having some insight into that, or like if you had a guest from like Immortals, and just because I haven't actually seen any content as to why that breakdown happened. And I I see a lot of like, I would have to go back and look at the drafts and see what was stagnating or like changes in the play between the weeks, because I wasn't able to like watch the games in really close detail. But yeah, that's like another huge question mark. And I think the only way that I would able to prevent that is just put in so much amount of time between these, like the first week of group stage and the second week of group stage, and that just really like there can be no slacking. There can be no like relaxation or like partying or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there does have to be the psychological element of it, right? Because you often see European teams do much worse in the first week and then do better in the second, because it's like they have the losses that motivate them, whereas the North American teams often like perform really well and then less of what they're doing changes. So I don't know if it's necessarily like that they're just slacking off so hard mentally, or that they just think that what they're already doing is so good and they fall for this problem again and again, because we've seen the same teams go to Worlds. So it's like
you want a theory,
learning
Kelsey?
their lesson in some way. But yeah.
So here's a theory I don't think you will ever have actually heard. I don't know if I've ever said it on Some of the Insight, but I actually think that this plays into the difference between North American sports and European sports.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Because in North American sports, it is traditionally the case that it is very, very structured how you coach people. Like from high school upwards, people literally like teach you how they want you to play the game. They teach you how your role will be applied. They teach you sometimes in practice, actually often has a lot of set pieces in North American sports where it's like, you will do this in response to what he does, and then he will do this. And then in the game, what we're relying upon now is that you can remember these set pieces. You know your role, you're going to kind of have it all imprint. You're going to be trained like a dog, basically. And you're going to do what's said on command. And in fact, if you notice, I don't think it's a coincidence that almost every North American sport features significantly more coaching input live during a game than European sports. Like NFL, they literally talk to them on the mic. Hockey, they come off the ice for the few minutes. The coach gives them the new orders, or the new guy coming out. You look across basketball, the coach can literally talk to you while you're playing. You have this direct coaching input, because essentially that seems to be the way that the game is structured. And so it helps the game to be better to allow them to do this. Now, the main European sport, because obviously European sport is dominated by football, soccer. And in soccer, yes, there have been some modern innovations in like certain set piece elements or certain tactical components that have some kind of this element, flowchart type logic. But traditionally, European sport is not thought of as a science. It is thought of as an art. And instead, your main aim is to assemble a team who naturally can come to these solutions based on either their normal playing style or how, after playing with each other, they adapt to each other. And the aim instead in European sport, this is why I'm coming from such an abstract point, is that I have always taken the perspective when I've looked at the really good European teams that this is what's happening. The good North American teams are a mixture of like good players who've got like half decent coaching or have a framework of how they want to play, whereas most of the European teams, they tend to be very, very differently stylistically, and it tends to be that a lot of their strengths play around the strengths of the players. And as a result, the reason why I'm bringing this point up is that the European teams, for me, succeed often off form. Like, the reason why I think they do so well in the second week is because it's all played on one day. So if one of them's really hot, things are going really well, everyone's super confident, our star players playing well, we're already not thinking the game's super formalized and structured anyway. So why would we be worried about this team we're playing? If they're playing well and we're playing well, we might beat them. Things might go well. We can feel confident in this game. They go into it. It's never all of them do well, but one or two of them do well. That's the team that does well. Unfortunately, a lot of league analysis comes from North America, because it's where English is the most commonly spoken language, and there's a lot of journalism and media. And so what's hilarious is we take the European team and we view them through the North American lens, and we immediately formalize and structure all that they did and tell Fnatic what a genius team they were for adapting to the meta and reading what they needed to do and do. Whereas some of that's like, I don't really know if you could have gone into their brain if they actually were thinking the way you were, because unfortunately that's the strength and the weakness of models, is that they do make sense of things, but you have to have the equipment that made the model to kind of make sense of it in that very specific sense. Otherwise, a different model could have been applied. And so it's an abstract point, but I do think there's something to it personally, because that's why actually, funnily enough, some of this comes from a point I've actually brought up many times, which is probably the only wise thing that Doublelift ever said, which was his famous line after Season 3 Worlds, which was that every region has its own style, and essentially that's not even that wise. It's really every team has its own style, and if you play to your style the best, as in you make your style as efficient and effective as it can be, it's probably better than being a crap version of SK Telecom. And funnily enough, it was actually the European teams doing well at Season 3 Worlds which made Doublelift realise this, because to bring it full circle, what happened was, going into Season 3 Worlds, a number of people, Doublelift, Crumbs, Ascara, a few people, all from North America, looked at Europe and they were like, these teams aren't playing like very tactical. They aren't playing like the meta at the moment, and so they will do badly at Worlds. And obviously that didn't happen. Actually, Europe much outperformed NA, and this was their conclusion after that. I mean, funnily enough, I think it's quite a wise conclusion. They didn't look at it and go, oh, well, they just figured out the meta. But no, they realized that actually they had their own limitations, but they played their style more effectively, whereas we were kind of like caught between our style and Korea's style. The problem with my epic things here is I've trained myself to do 10-minute videos where it's a monologue. So at the end, people just go, good one. Anyway, back to the conversation. So anyway, someone throw me a life preserver, bring the conversation back.
I think, generally speaking, I do think there is a difference in the way that North Americans, or I guess people from the US, which is what I can speak to, and people from like European countries approach competition or approach improvement. In general, because it's very culturally United States to be very pro, what is the word? It's almost like positive reinforcement, right? To be very like, what we're doing is good and we should build on like what we're doing that's good. Whereas I feel like what I've learned from talking to a lot of people from European countries, it's very different, which is where they'll like focus on building up flaws much more in a lot of ways.
What's the difference between solo queue, right? For example, people in NA want everyone not to be toxic. They want everyone to encourage their team, and that's how we're going to win. Whereas in Europe, the joke always is, the reason why it produces better players is it's because it's like being in Bane's pit, isn't it? So everyone's just like, fuck you, I'll kill you. It's like, that either you make it through that and you're a battle-tested player, or you just fucking die, you know?
So I think that's like also a difference, because if you're coming out and you're out of a hot week and you did super well, and a lot of the mentality towards competition or just like improvement will be to say, okay, what we're doing is good. We should keep doing this in this way. So I think that could be part of the mentality that is letting North American teams down to an extent.
Okay. Croissant, you're right in there with the fucking youth of the nation at the collegiate scene and working with teams occasionally. What do you think on this topic?
So whenever I think about this topic, I don't want to speculate, or I don't want to go into like cultural differences, because I actually
Lord forgive us, but yes, keep going.
Yeah.
What's your view on it? How do you do it differently then?
Well, I still speculate, but I try to give some context to it, and I also like make it known that like this is a lot of these intangibles. I like discussing intangibles, and I think that I'm generally more right about these intuitive, like the way that things intuitively work or how they happen, but I don't like take them as truth at all. Sure. Like I actually grew up in Europe for a few years, and like I've lived in the United States, specifically Southern California, for a long time, but I've also studied in South Korea, and while I was there, I played in their solo queue. I worked in Shanghai in China, and so while I was there, I also played in Chinese solo queue, and predominantly I've played in North American solo queue. I've never played in Europe or any other region, but I would definitely say like, I think...
Okay, so you are the chosen one, then tell us. The foremost world matrayer.
Yeah, I like the concept that, you know, you build a lot of mental resilience when you have to deal with all of these toxic players in Europe. And, you know, in North America, you have PewDiePie going 3-27 on Kog'Maw or something. And I I never thought I would enjoy PewDiePie as like a personality, because I knew he was an LCS, I knew he was streaming, but I didn't start watching him really until like the last year or two. And I think he's hilarious. But if you look at the reasons and like this is something that might also be holding Brazil back, where they have like a huge streaming population, but there's just so many drains on North American talent in terms of their players and also their coaches. And what people will just say, the player base is smaller, but to give you to more tangible things that are actual, like they're still debatable, but like it's I think there are definitely like very valid explanations for why NA talent is missing. Like, if you are a good player, first of all, or if you have a good understanding of the game, what would motivate me to go be an analyst for 2 years and make literally like nothing compared? Like Woodbuck, in your interview with him, he said that he was like the head coach for TSM, right? But he made he had to take a significant pay cut off of his entry level job into education, which is one of the lowest paying jobs in America.
Yes.
So there's just no incentive, and the players who are the retired North American players, you would think would go into coaching, but how many retired North American players have, other than like Saint or a few other Link went back to school. He went back to Berkeley. He tried to stay involved in the community for a bit, but I think he switched games. The bottom line is that the options of going to college or getting an education are more pressing time-wise for American players. They're also like being noticed as talent. I can speak to this myself, but being noticed as talent is much more difficult than perhaps in Korea. I don't mean to say that it's like harder to be good versus NA talent. I just mean that people are less willing to take chances. I would honestly say that a lot of people are lazy about recruitment. I contacted a lot of people when I was looking for opportunities.
How long ago is this?
This is so. I maybe contacted like 1 or 2 people before I made my videos, but once after I made my videos, like
what
I
year
actually
would
had
that be?
So I started. The first video I made was the one that LS saw. So on my very first video, which was in May 2017, it got 40,000 views. And I think the fact that that video only got me conversations with one North American team, unsolicited, they scouted me out, and I had to contact all of these other teams, and most of them didn't respond when I had like a really well structured and. Like if I had one conversation with a lot of these owners or management or even a player, I think they would understand like to what level I know the game and to what level I would be useful, not just in coaching, but also in management or like a variety of different positions, right? Because my experience comes mainly from finance and economics and computer science and traditional entrepreneurial things that happen in the United States. But like the reason that I'm still invested in esports and I haven't abandoned entirely is strictly because I have like a really, really strong passion. But like, if you talk to anyone, there are way more people in really high up positions in the United States or just like in like the top jobs available that have had an interest in League of Legends and have like dabbled in it, but then like just completely abandoned it because it's not viable at all.
Well, okay, I'll give you a quick piece of context, right, to make this very simple for people to understand. The reason why traditionally there weren't very many people in esports journalism who were ever any good, as in any good at all, is because there would never be anyone who had the whole package. You'd get someone who knew a lot about the game, but they didn't know how to write. So that's the reason why they stayed in esports journalism, because their skills only applied to esports. They would learn to write, they would learn to create content. Then you'd get someone who comes out of college with a degree in English or something. They know how to write, they know how to do the basics, but they don't know much about the game yet. So their pieces aren't going to be very in-depth, right? These sorts of people made up the majority of esports journalists, almost until now, basically. And now, maybe, because it's gotten big enough, you could have some people who this could be the first stage of their career, and it could be legit, they could make real money. But I always used to say before, it's not that esports can't have good people, it's that it's understandable, right? I personally wouldn't have been involved in esports if I had been more motivated to do my computer science degree and become a programmer. I would be a programmer now and wasting away in some cubicle somewhere. The point is, anyone with actual talent would have just applied their talent somewhere in life that gives them a lot more status, money, or opportunity, So unfortunately, you are sort of draining away all the talent outside of the game. That's kind of what you're alluding to, right?
Yeah. And I think people ask, sorry, this is gone on pretty long, but
keep going. That's the whole point of the show.
And you, how long was the start of this video? Like 30 minutes? I don't know. Who was talking during that?
I think people ask why would that not happen as much in Europe or Korea, and I think if you just look at Korea, for example, imagine there's a 17-year-old player who this is like, it might be offensive to some people, but the way that the Korean education system works is that they have school after school, and they get out like much later than students in the West do. They might get out at like 6 or 7 p.m., let's say, 6 days a week, and they'll go directly to a gaming cafe. I forgot what the term was, but I knew it. PC Bonk. And then they will, let's say that this student like will play for 3 or 4 hours, and he's 17. He's been playing for 3 years at the challenger level. He will be able to meet someone like it'll take him 20 minutes to meet someone who has heard about this guy from the solo queue ladder, and they'll have a meeting. They'll see if he's good talent, and there'll be an arrangement made. And the person won't have to relocate, right? Like from Missouri to Los Angeles or something like that. And that's just fantastic because they can see how the player develops under like an actual player house environment. And the reason people probably didn't want to take a chance on me or like my situation is pretty complex, but like there's a lot of trust that North American teams need before they let someone just like into their house, even for like a trial period. And I think that is a much smaller problem in Korea.
To add to that as well, in terms of like Korean anecdotes, I even know, for example, and this goes back to the StarCraft days, but definitely happened in League, that they even have what would sound like scenes from a movie where, for example, say you are a player they're testing out to see if you could even be a practice partner or a possible member of the team. They'll do stuff like they'll have you play a game where it's like, they'll play some scrims, but they don't just scrim with you and go, what if this was the real team? They'll play a scrim where they purposely give you like a specific champion or a bad champion that you might not be good at. Or they'll have you play like an inter-house scrim where you play against like Mata and Imp, and then they just purposely pick a lane that would just fuck you up all over the place just to see, would you crack under the pressure? And the point of these scenarios is it's not like you literally have to win the game to get in the team, but they're going to very quickly kind of get like a really extreme crash test version of what you're like. And the idea is if you just break down, as harsh as it sounds, there's a lot of other people we can try. If you just broke down at the first test, why are we going to continue? Whereas, unfortunately, while yes, you will trial people and you will give them scrims in the West, you can go through a whole first 3 weeks of LCS before you realize, like, holy shit, this guy's actually just fucking going to be terrible and competitive, how do we fix this? And so in a weird way, they kind of like filtered that out in Korea, I have to say, from a lot of the anecdotes I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the fact that before it was incentivized by Riot also that the LCK, or I guess OGN at the time, invested in farm teams and things like that. Just the understanding of this is like teams, member sister teams. Exactly. This was Loco Doco's like whole spiel when I talked to him on the old show that I did with Travis that is dead. But it was his whole spiel was down to like you have to go through so many hoops and be happy like just licking other people's boots and giving them coffee and doing all this other shit. Whereas like in North America, you pick someone out of solo queue and they're in an LCS chair like right away, and they don't necessarily have the qualities invested to understand like whether or not they can put in the work and all this stuff. So because there's like not really a second layer of built for not just players but staff, right? It's not just players but staff members, which is like the example that he brought up initially. It means that you really just have to take a chance on someone. And since right now we have in staff roles and a bunch of other situations, you have like known quantities or people who can at least put on a resume. It's like, I have a year experience playing with Origin, like that's not exactly the most winning of recommendations, but it's like, oh, okay, he knows what a team is, and we aren't going to end up in a Woodbuck Jarge situation where neither of them literally knew how to lead a scrim. So I think that's kind of the way that the scene has developed in the staff way, just because there isn't like a way to keep an eye on these people beforehand.
Yeah. Do you have any extra thoughts on that?
I mean, I think for having the staff, I think there's one thing that you and Thorin and LS talked about was that, the reason I hadn't been picked up was because I didn't know how to network and stuff, for example.
Sure.
But I think one of the things about having experience is if you have 2 to 3 years of experience in LCS, as an analyst and you're a known quantity, and you just like during that time, a lot of these people have not had to engage or interact at all with the community. So they're known quantities to the teams, in that, especially a lot of the new teams, right? In that they haven't completely destroyed or ruined the environment of the team that they were in. Yes. But how much have they added value? How much have kind of success have they added? And I think the vetting process, and I think the amount of effort that like North American coaches and like talent or the management is willing to go out and reach out and find the potential talent and staff is not there. I don't think it's there at all. And for example, I think people criticize. So I think what TSM, like Reggie and Parth were doing with George and Woodbuck was a good idea. They just did not execute and do enough. But it's like there's a gauge and it shows that like, you know, they're over here at the 5, and then they went all the way to the other side at the -4 when they just like didn't pick up a new coach and they just had Parth for like all that time. And then they swung back the other way in that they picked up this known quantity in Song. But I think there needs to be some
like a gradation between the positions.
Yeah. I think that needs to be observed and understood. And I think there are a couple of new teams that are doing that really, really well. And I think that's what will bring them success in the franchising system. Yeah.
Well, personally, it's kind of bizarre, isn't it, that you only just hire head coaches? Like, there's no, like, what's bizarre is you would think logically, to kind of tie into what you were saying before, Kelsey, that everyone who's a head coach now, after years and years of coaches, should have at least spent some tenure as an assistant coach in another team, you know? Like, they at least have some basis, and then they get their shot as the head coach now. That's actually how all traditional sports work, you know? Like, in NBA, etc., you don't just go straight to being the head coach. Okay, what were you going to say, Kelsey?
I think it's also worth noting is just that the fact that you do have a lot of competing factors in NA where it's like, I talk about this from the player angle all the time, but North American teams like really hate their domestic talent, right? And people like to bring up, well, our population is so small and everything else, but like if that's the case, then first, like why isn't China literally the greatest region in every esport of all time?
Taiwan's pretty fucking good as a result, right?
That's the second point, right? Is that why is LMS like able to outperform like North American teams and European teams and Chinese teams in some instances? So it's just very strange that this is like the shortcut argument that people give. Also, like the PC versus console gaming, whatever else. But people like to put down like the North American talent base a lot. But I think a lot of it is just a lack of scouting in players. Just like there was the whole thing where Song did an interview and said, well, if you brought over Korean coaches, then every team, if you brought over 7 Korean coaches, then the LCS would be 70% better or something like this, where I do think that there's stuff like this in almost every...
Didn't have any sort of ulterior motive to be saying that, did
absolutely not, right?
Maybe my friend, my brother, maybe bring him over.
So
bring
it's
back Paragon. Yeah.
There's definitely like a weird... Within the North American scene, there's this weird like bias against North American talent in and of itself. So...
Okay. Because I actually definitely agree with the premise that Croissant's getting at here, which is like it is very weird that not only did they not try newer talent, especially when sometimes they're in a scenario where they must know that they're barren of talent. You know, they're like right now. Here's the amazing thing about NA at LCS as it stands right now, is that there isn't a coma in NALCS. It doesn't even matter that Path won all these LCS. It doesn't matter that Loco won LCS. It doesn't matter that Cloud9 got to all these finals. It doesn't matter that Immortals rose up like this. There is no one where if someone started a franchise tomorrow in NA and said, right, here's a blank check, which NA coach do I buy now? I couldn't tell them. Like, I wouldn't even know which ones would fucking be good with a different team. Like, listen, I realize everyone loves him, but I don't even know that I would tell them to get Path. I think I would probably tell him maybe get him as your analyst, and that depends if you've got the sort of team where they actually would play his style of play. You know, there's all these factors I'd have to add into the mix, you know. So it is bizarre to me that they recycle talent. Like, I agree. I've never understood the idea. I mean, I could call out some names here, but I mean, I've already done it on like so many past episodes. There's people who, what they've done is they were an okay coach with one team that was like the 5th best in LCS. And then they went to another team that maybe had the right players. And for one split, they were the 3rd best in LCS. And then after that, they go to a different team because then the team they stayed at didn't do well the next split. So then they go to the team that's like the 7th best with not as good players because they don't have as good players. No one really critiques them as much. And at one point, you just want to step in and go, what the fuck are you guys all doing? Like, does anyone actually think this guy's a really good coach? If not, can we actually just try someone out? Because even if they're not as good, they have a chance to be better. This guy, we know, if we've proven one thing with this guy, so he's not a really good coach. He's just all right.
I mean, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, is that a lot of NA teams are still very player-centric, right, in the way that they're run. So part of it is just you want a coach that the players will like and respond to, because if you hire someone you don't know anything about and then like the first thing he says tilts the players, they might just shut off completely and never give him a chance again, right? So in that regard, it's kind of, they know that certain coaches can at least be friends with the players and not completely ignored, so they're more willing to kind of invest in this because they understand like the player mentality and the kind of coaches that the players want. And if you brought in like a 21-year-old kid who's maybe had some collegiate experience or something, the players might instantly be like, well, why aren't we getting Song? Stuff like this. So.
Sure.
Okay, I've got a question then, Croissant. So how old are you, did you say? You are 21, are you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, isn't that a problem you would face then? Let's use you as an example, because you can obviously speak specifically about yourself. As much as you say, right, and I think you're probably right, if you got a sit-down meeting with Reginald or Noah Winston, back in the days when he used to be in League of Legends, any of these people, I agree, you probably would come off like exactly who they'd want. Like, you'd seem like a really diligent person with great life experience, nice resume, you'd be able to say all the right things. The difference is, though, if I put you in a room with Double Lift, Jensen, like, I'm not going to lie, mate, they'd tear you the fuck up. Even if you were making straight fire points and you were, like, actually analysing them well. And, like, basically, your best chance would be if somehow one of these guys liked you personally and you got, like, a personal friendship and maybe they vouched for you in that sense. Like, I would say, even though let's say in this hypothetical scenario, you'd be the best coach, like, you'd actually do a great job, you'd basically need me to be like, I'm going to keep these guys in line, like if they fuck with you, I'm going to point out like, Double Lift, come on, mate, you had a fucking bowl cut, like you're a loser, you never did anything, you're good in the game, like this is real life, don't fuck with me, like I could handle that part and you could do the whole analysis part, but it's also hard to have all these skills in one in a head coach, because this is an area I always bring up, is that Koreans didn't solve this problem. They backdoored their way into it by having a ludicrously patriarchal, hierarchical society. Now, I wouldn't suggest we implement that in the West, nor do I believe it's possible. Like, I don't think we can have a Riot compound where children are raised from birth to live in this system just to win at a video game once a year. Seems unreasonable to me. So the problem is we're now, again, looking for solutions that you can't copy the Korean one. It doesn't work, right? So what do you think on this topic? Because it is a tough part, right? Because actually, in line with this, I know a lot of very smart people who have been coaches, and they could never bridge that gap. They could either never get the respect, or they were always seen as, as too young, or they didn't have the forceful personality. Because actually, I'll just put this as a final point. I often think it doesn't really go hand in hand, actually. Like, I think the kind of person who's very good at analytical thought is usually a kind of bookish person who isn't super social, who sits in a room watching VODs all day and noting things, and that's who you want to be like that. Unfortunately, to then have that guy be super charismatic and to sell people on an idea and to know how to deal with people, there's a lot of skill sets here that are very diverse that you can't expect a lot of humans to have.
Yeah. So, are you talking about for me specifically, or for...
Yeah, why not use you as an example? Like, wouldn't it be? Don't you anticipate that would be an issue for you if you indeed were put into a team with a Jensen or a Double Lift?
Yeah. So, if we were to use me as an example, but speak towards the larger ecosystem, I think, I've thought about it before, and I would never suggest that we implement the patriarchal system or like the very specific. You listen to me, and there's like no discussion, but. There's, as you said, too many of the coaches are friends of the players. And while I would naturally love to be friends with certain players, I think that they go too far and their friendship like becomes more important than a lot of like their ability to analyze things, their ability to help the player improve in a way that you don't do in the relationship of a friendship, but you have to separate that. But I think the way that, for me personally, like I would never run into that problem because I think that I do have the mixed qualities and the rare combination of traits where I am analytical, but I'm also personable and can be laid back and can help people. Like I was thinking about like the differences between me and you and LS and just like how we convey our information and how we communicate with people. And
come on then, give me some insight.
I mean, you guys have fantastic analogies and ways of explaining things that make me just like agree with you, and also it's like humorous and it's very entertaining. But I think that for me,
by the way, just as a very quick sidebar, that's actually one area where LS is probably the most misunderstood, because what so many people, who admittedly I think a lot of them are just idiots, do is they go, he's talking about Dragon Ball Z. I don't care about Dragon Ball Z. So you've missed the entire point of that. The whole point of an analogy like that is if he explained it in the very specifics of the game, you might not be able to grasp it. But maybe if you've seen Dragon Ball Z, as he describes a dynamic factor in Dragon Ball Z, it might make you think, how does that relate to League of Legends? Oh, now I see what that is. That's kind of the whole point of that. Just as, for example, if you were to describe someone's personality using a character, you wouldn't necessarily be describing that they looked exactly like that character. Just a little distinction I thought I'd reiterate again in my life. Anyway, keep going. Yeah. So great analogies, making good points, entertaining.
As for me, I separate like the ways that I communicate in my social interactions, and then when I really try to make a point or break down something rationally, like I just go into a different zone and I like take on a different personality and aura. And I think that you and LS have like a very complete like identity, and that like I am still moving towards understanding where I lie. And that's why I've like, the reason I wouldn't run into the problem is because I have always wanted to be an assistant coach. And like, I think that in that context, that working with players and working with them not as like a superior, but as like like an equal or even a subordinate is much more manageable. And like through that process, gaining their respect is very doable. But I think one thing that's really interesting to note is that you have players like Reginald who have respect because they got in early. Like they were like so much, they were in the right place at the right time, and they were good players. They put in a lot of effort into building their organization. And then you have people like Noah, who is, he went to a college that was really close to me. He dropped out like in the second semester of his last year in college. Had his
shameless, isn't it? Just lazy. Just couldn't even follow through on the things, Didn't even finish college. I mean, fucking hell, what kind of message is that for the kids? No, obviously joke. Yeah, continue on here.
Yeah, and he never played, but he developed respect from his players and from everyone that's interacted with him because he communicates in a way that's clear and he states his goals. And I think that if you put me in a room with Doublelift or Jensen and you force them to talk to me, I think the difficulty is having them actually converse with me. But
with some sort of cattle prod or something. What are you talking about? Come on.
It's like if they want to, if Doublelift and Jensen really have as like a big enough ego where they're not willing to rationally consider like where my qualifications come from and the kind of like life path. Like I couldn't drop out at the age of 14 when Doublelift was like 19, and he didn't have to go to University of California, Irvine, because he like had these opportunities to go to these tournaments, etc., and prove himself. I think those people, I think they both would understand and like see what kind of dynamic that I bring that no one else in the scene brings. And I think that's the thing, right? Like that's with me as a specific example. And I think other coaches, if the effort is being made to bring these people, it doesn't have to be you or like as you or someone else saying, listen to this person, but even just as management going out, finding certain people, having conversations with them, and not just defaulting to the players going to the management and saying, oh, I disagreed with this person like on this one thing and it really upset me. It's like you have to look how these people are adding value and impacting your players, even if it makes them upset in the short term. And obviously how I would handle the situation would be different. Like maybe I'd want to appease certain players in like the very short term, but the long-term goal is all about success and like pushing the region forward. And I think that's something that's really lacking in a lot of the coaching staff. And
I mean, this is also where I always put this caveat of context in as well. Like, yeah, let's face it, these are like 20-year-old kids in general, you know. So unfortunately, you're going to be dealing with immaturity. And then as actually you referenced there, they're not just 20, but they're even fairly immature 20-year-olds, because a lot of them started playing video games when they were 16 and went deep down this fucking rabbit hole of like the Matrix of like, you take this pill, you wake up and a normal human. Take this one, you follow me down the 4chan hole and see where your motherfucking life goes. Like a Black Mirror episode or something. So admittedly, if people were like 28, like here's the thing, if you could get to Doublelift and Jensen when they're 28, I guarantee they'll be fucking totally different people, probably learned from a lot of the hardships of life, been through all these experiences, had good teammates, had bad teammates, had good coaches, had bad coach. Now that guy, you could reach, you know, I think a lot of people could reach them and they might not. It's like, believe it or not, that analogy of women where some women when they are young they are drawn to the attractive man or the man who has certain qualities that society tells them is better. But famously, once they've been broken on the wheel of life, as we all are, they then think, right, let's just find someone that I could settle for and relate to and understand. And that, my friends, is the circle of life in many ways. So basically, you need to get Doublelift on the rebound. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion, but it's like the analyst side and the coach side and giving people chances and raising talent is just like a microcosm of things that I think North America automatically tries to look for a shortcut on. Like North American League of Legends automatically is looking for shortcuts.
So what's not a shortcut then? Do you have a principle in mind of a direction or something you see as a way forward?
So yeah, in terms of just like adding stuff as you go along, right? First of all, which is like something that we never seem to want to do. We automatically want to add stuff as soon as we see it. It's like the super shiny thing, and then we add it. It's almost like buying Bitcoin because everyone talks about how good Bitcoin is, and you don't even bother to research what exactly Bitcoin is, or like these alternate cryptocurrencies. Okay. You're just filling out your portfolio because you see that this Bitcoin stock or the Bitcoin value is going up. So you're buying these cryptocurrencies and adding them to your portfolio. You don't know what they are. You don't even know what they're supposed to be a symbol of for like the value added in the future, whatever. You don't understand why they're good. You don't understand why people are interested in them. You're just like, okay, this is going well. We should obviously incorporate it. And then you add a bunch of stuff like that. And then when stuff fails and falls apart, you don't really know where you went wrong, which decision was bad, like what was the underlying reasoning. So it's just like adding, actually understanding. No, just like start out with a team of 5 players. Add a coach. See if this coach works. Reason with this team, like see if this happens. Like, do you need someone else? Is the coach saying you need someone else? Or the players saying you need someone else? Okay, then add someone else. If this environment isn't working, then you fire this person. You get in like a bunch of other, like you just try fewer stuff at a slower pace and actually understand what you're implementing. If it makes sense and you're doing research on the kind of thing that you're implementing, like not because the stuff that you're adding might even just be stuff that you think the Korean teams are doing, right? It might just be stuff that you think they're doing. That's not exactly what they're doing, right? It's just, that's what it looks like on the surface level. So before you add stuff, actually research it, understand why it's good. Like, obviously, I'm not saying don't look at other stuff and see what's going well. I'm saying look at those things more closely. Try to understand why it's good. How can you then adapt those things? It's like maybe you decide you're really interested in cryptocurrency, but like you like Neo better because you like their philosophy or whatever or something else. So you decide to buy Neo instead of Bitcoin, whatever. Like, I think this kind of situation is a better approach to what should be doing instead of looking for shortcuts.
Okay. You know, the funny thing is, by the way, I can even relate this to Western players, because here's the thing, okay? Whether or not Western teams are good enough or whatever, it's not hype. I genuinely do think that every single year you could get at least 1 or 2, if not like 5 Western players who actually are as good as the best Koreans. Now, maybe not Faker, because that's like a ridiculous outlier, but every other player, basically. I think you can find the Bjergsons of the world, the Mythies of the world, who are just phenomenal players. And what's funny is, a common trend with them is basically what you've just said now, but it's always interpreted negatively early in their careers, which is that what happens is, they're very stubborn. And why they're stubborn is exactly what you're saying. They're not stubborn because they don't want to learn. It's because the person telling them something tells them, do this. Why? Well, it works for Koreans, or, this guy who's better than you does it. And they're like, yes, but why? And it's until they can understand why, they won't incorporate it into their game. Because what a lot of people will not understand naively is it would ruin their game if they just incorporated willy-nilly all the stuff they didn't understand. It would actually make them worse players. So funnily enough, players themselves on an individual level sort of get this. That's why the ones that make it through are actually fantastic players without having been trained by some super coach or an amazing solo queue environment. They still took like a very, very sparse version of it, but of trial and error, basically. The problem is, as you're saying, this almost never actually enters the coaching world, because unfortunately coaching, as much as it seems like it's results-based, it's not. It's all politics and social interaction. And as soon as you get into that world, I mean, as you can see by politics around the world, it's incredibly murky territory. You know, you can be led all sorts of ways by prevailing philosophy, or for example, in the LCS, I think a lot of these examples, especially in NA, where they had the money to have fixed these problems years ago, it's just copycat league of, oh, the top team does this, so we need to do that. Oh, what, they have an analyst? Well, we better get an analyst. And the best, I thought, example was where they were talking on that episode we did about positional coaches, where it's like, oh, we should get a positional coach. And it's like, oh, but this player doesn't like it. You know, like this is an example of where you're applying something that you haven't even really thought through yourself. It just sounds like a cool idea, right? It's like, oh, what? So if I get a spoiler on my car, it's a little bit more aerodynamic. It's like, shut the fuck up, man. You don't know what that spoiler's about. Just get the car.
Yeah, and I think just in general, it's funny because one of the most interesting conversations I had with Prawley about Ryu, because Prawley's fundamental idea was that like the Korean players were better because they were asking why much more. And I think maybe he just hadn't encountered enough like North American players who are doing this, because I think ultimately this is what lets players get better, is that they are constantly like wondering why you're doing stuff, and they're constantly looking for ways that are better and trying to understand these types of fundamentals. And this is like, for him, was when he met Ryu, and Ryu literally just asked why to almost everything because his English wasn't good or whatever, and then he had to explain like situations better, or had to question himself on why he was like telling the players these sorts of things. And he said that like the experience of coaching Ryu in this way made him a better coach. So I think that, and he was trying to say that like this not taking stuff for granted was a Korean mentality thing, but I don't really think it is. I just think it's a way to approach something to be more successful that is universal. So
okay, right, let me just think. So whereabouts were we there? We were just finishing up on the part that was about how people implement things. Right, okay, I actually here's a topic for you then. So if we accept, at least for the premise of this discussion, what I just said there, that there are superlative talents in the West who are very, very good. By the way, funnily enough, no one ever stops and thinks about this, but because we just compare Bjergsen to Faker, and because we compare whatever Forgiven to Bang or to Prey or something like that, you know, everyone stops to think that these are actually terrible comparisons, because we're comparing outliers to outliers and then going, oh, look at the difference. It's like, it's totally fucking irrelevant, isn't it? Like, what you should actually compare is you should take Altec and you should compare him against, who would you say is a comparable LCK AD carry to Altec?
Sang-Yoon, something?
Yeah, not bad. That's not a bad one. So someone like that, if you compare those players, I think you'll actually realise that the difference isn't ridiculous. I mean, these are fairly talented players who, in the right team, will look good. In the wrong team, will look terrible. With the right support, will look better. With a different support, might look decent. Might, with a certain meta, look very good for a while. With a certain meta, just go off the boil a little bit. You know, you'd actually find that the talent pool. So yes, I'd say Korea has a better talent pool, perhaps a wider talent pool, but in terms of depth, like player to player, I don't think it's ridiculously different, which is why a lot of this discussion is centered around coaching and philosophy of players, etc. But one area I wanted to get your take on, Croissant, is when you have very good players who are these outliers, they are the Fakers, the Bjergsens. Like, if you look in every region, there's a reason why these players dominate the standings. It's one of the reasons why I think sports is very fascinating to me personally, is because it doesn't matter about like having the best team and the best tactics. These are really important qualities, but the problem is, if we both have the best team and the best tactics and a very good read on the meta and great coaching, if you have Michael Jordan and I have almost anyone else, you probably just win most of the time, because you have an extra special player who, with all those qualities around him, then can do something extra that I can't. So actually, to me, another area that's important and where I see a lot of Western teams fall down is sometimes they have these amazing superlative star players who are outliers, but they don't always apply them to the team concept as well, or they don't always know how to use the strength of the player as well. So, for example, when you did look recently this year at Worlds, it is a very fair criticism, whether or not everyone knows the specifics, that Bjergsen wasn't really a superstar player. Like, yes, he might have all these great reasons as to why the way I was set up in this game didn't allow me to, or, I had to play this champion because someone else couldn't play someone else. That's all great, but if he's such a superlative player, something was going wrong with actualizing him in the game. So do you see some sort of an issue in that sense with Western teams? See, what he's doing right now, folks, is he's thinking. And that's actually a precursor to having a good idea. You don't just start talking and then come up with ideas later. That's my job. So he's still thinking, he's thinking across things. I remember my life when I was in China.
I do a little bit of that, where I talk until I find an idea. But I think your question was just, do the Western teams set up their star players?
Yeah, do they make use of the star players as well as the Koreans? Maybe I'm off on this one. Maybe they do, and that's not really that big a factor. What's your take on it? As ever, feel free to disagree. But if you think I'm very right, then just agree and compliment me and then expand upon the point.
I don't... When I watch LCK, it just isn't apparent to me that these superstar players are set up particularly well. I think it's very, very rare for you to see an instance of Bang popping off on Lucian with a Lulu mid or a Lulu support and just destroying the other team. They plays are, it's just the nature of the sport where I really don't think one player will ever be as impactful as Michael Jordan in League. And
sure.
I think that I definitely don't think it's a problem with the West that they don't know how to incorporate their star players as well as Korea. I think maybe they don't know how to play to the strengths of, a particular composition. But when you have a team like TSM with Doublelift, Hanser, and Bjergsen, there was an opportunity for every single one of those players to, style on their Korean counterparts.
Sure.
If they were, really set up. And I think TSM doesn't do that for Bjergsen, but they don't do that for Hanser or Doublelift as well. So, I would say they're just not as good. Western staff and the players themselves aren't as good at shining against Korean talent in general.
I would say that it's more to do with Korean teams are very good at having their players specialize in certain things or in playing a certain role within the team. So I guess you could see the way that Samsung were playing, for example, when Crown was struggling to an extent, is that they would put him on specific set of champions, and then they would have Ambition go mid to help him reset. And in this way, they would get an item advantage for him to compensate for some of the things that he was doing that were kind of screwing up a little bit. So it's just understanding the specialist nature of the way Ambition is interacting here, or and it also broke down a lot when we saw Korean players being imported to other regions, and teams didn't really necessarily understand the specialist nature of the players they were importing, and they just put them on whatever team and said carry. For example, EasyHoon was, I would say, a player who was very good at a specific skill set, and he was put on a team where he was supposed to be a star mid laner. And so I think in that regard, it's...
LPL exposed for reading Theon articles. Okay.
Exactly. So I think that a lot of LCK players, almost for a very long period, you didn't have to see them have all of these dimensions, where you didn't have to see Someday, well, actually Someday is a bad example because he played tanks for a while, but you didn't necessarily have to see Imp play the same sort of late game team fighting hyper carry type champions that Deft would play. You didn't have to see Deft play these super hard laning champions, because those weren't skill sets that they would really specialize in until they came to LPL. And then I was wow, these guys can be really multidimensional or whatever. And so I think that LCK teams are very good at narrowing into sort of a specialization. Also a famous example is that Deft used to be a support player, and they said, no, you should be an AD carry. So it's just kind of this identification of player strength and molding a team into a situation where this strength does well, but the player doesn't necessarily have to do like literally everything, I think is something that maybe Western and Chinese teams are not as good at identifying. So I think that might be something to say, but I don't think it's an issue of like always propping up the star player, or an issue of always, it's an issue of like, once you get any kind of player at all, understanding what team he fits well in and what kind of players he complements, I think.
Okay. I mean, I get the sense, I'll be very brief on this point, that actually that's also maybe a difference. Again, I might have to speculate on this one because I can't say I know every team specifically, but I get the sense that the way that Korean teams work, again, they've just backdoored their way into getting teams that fit them, because what happens is they don't tend to change coaching staff a lot. So I get the sense that when you join Korean teams, first of all, there's not a massive amount of, I've always said this point, there's not a massive amount of actual transfers of big superstar names in Korea. Like, you don't see Imp just go and join fucking SK next season. It's actually very rare, for example, that you had the KT roster this season and then Peanut go and join. That didn't tend to happen in history. You stick with the players you've got, or you get brand new players out of solo queue. So my take on that was that you tend to have, because you have the same coaching staff, it's like in sports, if you go and join the New England Patriots, you're going to have to play how Bill Belichick wants you to play. If you go and join, like the Spurs in basketball, you have to play the way that Greg Popovich plays, because that's his system. Therefore, first of all, he will recruit players he knows can play his system or have the tools to be able to. And secondly, you have no choice to. You must play that. So for me, Korea's more like that. Whereas in the West, what you tend to do is, first of all, you have different coaches every split, which is madness in itself, but that's just the way they do it. Secondly, you tend to get the players sometimes before you have the coach. You get a bunch of players and you say to this coach, oh, hey, I know you know a lot about the league, so see this random group of players, yeah, teach them how to play the game. Okay, but no, just do it. Okay, well, so half the time, it might be the case that an amazing coach never even got to implement his style. Maybe he's had to compromise his whole style, because guess what? His style was based around, we're going to have a carry top laner and a jungler who ganks. Oh, what's that? I've got Doublelift as my best player, and my top laner is Lolo. Oh, shit. You know, like in that scenario, he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Like, it's a very, very brief point, but I do feel like that at least plays some role. Again, maybe broad strokes. I'm sure there's teams that are different, but I don't really know of many cases in the West that are comparable in that sense.
Yeah.
I also think, I was just going to say very briefly that it has a lot to do with who is building the teams, right? Because people who are building the teams in the West tend to be far and away people who aren't like super skilled at the game right now. They go for brands. They go for, oh, this player is good because Fion wrote this awesome article about Flame and things like that. So.
I was just going to say that those systems don't exist in North America. And when you consider league in general, like the system of how like Ferguson would run Manchester United is just not, it's like really hard to imagine that kind of system, even for myself, because the game is constantly changing as well. And so while I do think it's difficult for a lot of coaches when they're not able to pick the personalities and attitudes of players that they want to pick, I don't think that coaches usually, I think they usually look for like the emotional or intangible or like the work ethic things in a player, more so than like, I want a assassin playing mid and like, you know, like a pop off 80 carry, or look for those role players. And that's why like people like Crown or Faker who have like, they or Bjergsen are considered the greats because they can fit those changes. I
don't think Crown is that versatile. I'm like the only one. So.
I also did not. But I think he's just getting a lot better.
Sure. I mean,
well, the funny thing is,
there's a reason they were blind picking like Malzahar and Talia every game. I'm just throwing it out.
So then this is actually another topic we can go into then, which is that recruitment in the West and picking players, I think, is fucking atrocious. Like, unless you have like some amazing player who really has a read on solo queue and he says, oh, this guy's actually good, you know, I've played enough with him, I can tell he does this, you know. And unless you have that, orgs to me are terrible at picking up players. Like, first of all, if you ever talk to coaches, they aren't even on the same page at all about what we were just talking about now. They're all in this delusional world where you'll have like Western coaches who are in like the 8th best NALCS team, and they'll be like, oh, I recruit players based on like attitude, and also, you know, they've got to be players who can actually like, you know, they can learn all aspects of the game and they can play all styles of the game, and they can do like, you're describing players who don't even exist, never mind the ones that you've recruited. Like, if you really buy that that's who you've recruited, then I'm going to have to just start immediately like fucking deconstructing your brain to find out what's going on before we can even get to get the players we're going to get, because this is a ludicrous way to think about the game. But they really do think about a lot of these factors. Like, I mean, famously, this is an area where I'll give you a good example for me of like the quagmire that the West is in. So I actually think that CLG is a really good example here, because all reports, I have never heard a single person, publicly or behind the scenes, imply that they think Zix is not a good coach. Everyone is like, not only is he a good coach, but he's maybe the best coach in NA, and he works fantastically with his players, blah, 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 etc. But then you look at the players he works with, and it's basically like a absolutely black and white scenario that he seemingly only works really well with players who fit his personality type. So players who are very laid back and aren't as argumentative and maybe open and receptive to learning and all the rest of it. And even though, yes, coach number one, who I hypothetically postulated before, would be like, that is the only player you should recruit. No, as I outlined earlier, the best players aren't even like that. The Jensen double if forgiven type motherfuckers aren't going to be like, yes, Zix, tell me more. What about this? You know, like, he's going to have to win them over and you have to get. And so unfortunately, to me, that's actually a great example of where, as good as Zix is, he has only gone as far as that skill set can take him. And he hasn't been able to adapt to the other skill set because he's never been able to bring in a superstar player, make them work in the team, and therefore take CLG to where they need to go, which is clearly their own limitation. And unfortunately in life, that is actually an area that will always wreck you. You can only go as far as your strength carries you because you don't do anything about your weakness. And therefore you'll always be dictated by that. And you see teams take on the personality of their coaches or their star players, etc. And so I don't really know how you fix this. Again, this is an area we're not like, by the way, the premise of this show was not us three knuckleheads figure out Western League of Legends. You're welcome, Reginald and Steve Arneset. Please cash the check for this public think tank. No, the point is we're highlighting some of the big problems. That's a problem. I don't know how you solve it.
I think it's almost
Still
with a
love
lot
you,
of...
Zix.
You kind of have to hire coaches who have failed, you know, at some point. You kind of have to be willing to and want to hire coaches who have failed. And maybe that's what teams are already doing and they're just like not conveying it well.
Please explain further what you mean by failed. Like, Loco Doka recently failed to get into LCS twice. So you're not talking about him.
The first team that you coach, you're probably not going to get through to the players very well.
Yes.
Either because of personality reasons or you're just missing what fundamentals you need to teach teams. Like, you don't understand the scrim breakdown thing, like the whole Yamato cannon, the whole Yamato cannon thing where he was really confused, mind blown by the fact that he heard coma points to like timestamps of VODs several years ago. But you're probably going to not do very well on your first team, right? And ideally you have another coach or someone else on the team who has like more experience and worked with you. But probably like the first team that a coach has worked with, if you go and you talk to those players and you talk to that organization to get a recommendation from them, they'll probably say like, nah, this guy was an idiot. He didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. But if you ask them about, like, did he make changes or did he try to implement changes? Did he still work hard? And then you see his progress after that and you start looking at, like, some of the things that he changed and listen to his perspective on some of the things that he thinks that he could do better now or whatever. Because I feel like coaches to get better have to work on shit that they're bad at, which means ultimately they will make mistakes. And we have this idea or this conception. I don't know if you guys read Amazing's Facebook post where he was like, you want a man's man who has the answer to everything and is never wrong about this, this, and this. And this is what we think of as a coach. And this is what we need. And so coaches are automatically set up to fail. And I think that like you can definitely strive to be that, but you're not going to be that in your first coaching gig. And you can't let that kind of burn you as time goes on, because if you are really dedicated and you really want to make this thing work, you're going to get better and you're going to get to a position where you can have a lot of the different answers. And yeah, people have personality limitations, but I personally believe that you can still work on being a more commanding presence. You can still work on the game knowledge aspects if that's what you're.
You can also add more stuff to tie in your earlier point, right? You could add a guy who has that as well, right?
Yeah, you can add a guy who has that as well, and you can, while you're working on these weaknesses as well, like maybe the team you're working for doesn't have a huge budget, so you have an issue there, but you still continue to work on these flaws. But the chances are, like, the first time you coach a team, it's going to suck, like, straight up. So I kind of think that that's part of the issue, is that you can't keep looking at these guys who are pulling the same kinds of results and working with the same kinds of teams over and over again, because those guys probably aren't trying shit, right? In the same sense that people who are screwing it up in different ways are. And obviously, at a certain point, you can't just like hire the guy who screwed up 5 teams. That's idiotic, but you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And I think that Zix and Parth are the 2 coaches that I've talked to most in LCS.
Okay.
And I would say that, yeah, they have very different philosophies and different approaches. And I respect both of them, but I think that they can be, they have a very particular approach. And I don't know if they're making the changes that they have to in their approach. And I think that the solution to that, I mean, I know we're not offering a bunch of solutions in the problems that we're raising, but I think for that specifically, you have to supplement that coach with not new players every season, but like an assistant coach or someone who will question and will challenge those like Tony to make to try new things and make failures in that regard, for CLG to reach whatever heights you think they can reach. And the other thing about just the initial question about recruitment and how coaches select their players and how you think it's generally really, really badly done, I would agree. And I would say the team like Immortals was just exceptional in their recruitment. And I know that certain players like Cody Sun can be pretty polarizing, but I was looking at Cody Sun like a couple of months before Immortals picked him up, and like I don't think people appreciate enough how, or I haven't seen it appreciated enough how Noah's philosophy from the very beginning has been doing like a Moneyball thing or statistics. Yes. And he selected in his first the first Immortals roster seems very self-explanatory, right? You take Huni and Reignover, legends, and then are like just coming off of the best season ever in Europe. And then you have Bobelter, solid North American mid, and then Wild Turtle and Adrian were a little bit of a surprise, but Wild Turtle was like a very solid AD carry, and also Adrian was like a very good talent coming in from season 5 and season 4. But when he rebuilt the roster, it was like there were more question marks than there were this first time, right? Yes. And with just Bobelter, and then with Flame, who a lot of people like the kind of metrics that they used to pick up Flame and Ale, and then Cody, and then Xmithy is like more of a standard that they knew because he's played with Bobelter. But
do you have any insight as to what metrics they used?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that they didn't. Based on what I've heard, you probably have heard something completely different, but I don't think they used like some sophisticated metrics. Like a lot of people knew about Cody Sun. Cody Sun was probably the most talked about rookie AD. Ola was a name that was floating around a ton. Like a lot of people were looking at him. I would like, to me, this, like they had Dardoch, right? To me, this was I would be surprised if they did because if they did numbers, you would think that they would come out with different answers than they did, because these were just like, these are like brand building players who people have been looking at, and to me that's what came out. Like also,
I forgot about the whole Dardoch situation. But
so I don't really think it was like a sophisticated approach to hiring any of these players,
Croissant,
based on my understanding. But
So I don't think it was as sophisticated as it could have been, but I definitely think that if they wanted to build a brand, they would not have gone for a couple of those players. I knew that Cody Sun was like a pretty, like he was talked about as a rookie, but it's like unexpected for Immortals, even though they had like disappointing playoff performances, but as like probably like top 3 to 5 organizations in the LCS to pick up Cody like immediately and train him. And who are
they going to get though? I'm just curious. Like if they already have their import slots filled, like which NAAD are they going to get if not?
I mean, they could have gone for. Where was Altec in the spring split? I don't think he was on.
Wasn't it?
I thought he was on FlyQuest. Oh, he was.
He went on FlyQuest in the spring.
And I think picking up Altec, and then I think Altec was in a quantity, and there would have been a couple of other choices like Apollo, etc. And I don't think that the other teams could have outbid them. I think they consciously decided like, we're going to pick up Cody. And I don't think they splurged a huge amount on any of their like transfers except for Dardoch maybe. But like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Flame was a really, like, I don't know. Cody just seemed like a very obvious choice to me. I think that they had the previous year tried out Altec also and had decided to go with Wild Turtle over him. So there may have been something specific with Altec that they didn't want to deal with.
Yeah.
Or something like this. So it wasn't that weird to me that they picked up Cody Sun, because if there was going to be a rookie pickup in any role, period, that's what I think it was, Cody Sun in general.
Right. First of all, just as a quick sidebar, Croissant, when you say that you'd already looked at Cody Sun and, like, you know, you sound like you admire the approach that Immortals took and in taking a chance on him, etc. Right. With all that said, after seeing Cody Sun play in these LCS splits and now play at Worlds, do you think that he has delivered on the potential and he's a strong player?
I definitely think, considering his regular split performance, spring and summer, that his growth went exactly as I could have hoped. The only thing I was just like I mean, I was appalled by the group stage games in at Worlds, but like.
Like, here's the problem I have with him as a player, okay, is this is one of the problems that will always be a case for someone who's touted from, like, lower levels or solo queue, is that you never know. It's kind of like if you got, like, a wild horse. Yeah. It might be, like, super fast and all the rest of it, but you never know how it's going to settle in when you actually put it in the stable and you start trying to race it in an actual way around a track, right? So the biggest worry with any of these players, and to me, I have to say, as an outsider, I feel like Cody Sun displayed this, and that's why I'm actually very concerned for any team he plays for, is when I saw him play in some of the big playoff situations, and especially at Worlds, he was straight shook. And that is the one thing that I personally, as an owner, would stay the fuck away from the most, because I always say this point. Whenever it's a psychological problem, that is by definition the hardest problem to possibly fix. I can fix a player who needs a little bit of work or needs some discipline or needs his role refined. I can't really fix a guy's brain. Yeah. I mean, if I could do that, first of all, I'd fix my own fucking brain, wouldn't I? But, you know.
I do think it's a very common rookie problem that some rookie players have fixed over time, though. So I don't necessarily, like, I think when you're, part of the issue is that when you're picking up a rookie player for LCS, you kind of need to expect that he will have some issues with stage fright. He will have some of these problems that you have to get over. It's just, you're kind of hedging your bet on how long that will take. And for some players, it's almost immediate. For some players, it takes quite a while. So for me, I don't necessarily think, like, Cody Sun's psychological issue is damning at this point. I think a year, maybe next year, if he still has, like, these kinds of problems, then it's like, okay, this guy is not really worth any of the hype. But I think that people are very quick to write off rookie players to an extent. But I do understand the hesitation to pick one up at all, because there almost always is some kind of, like, factor here. So hopefully the academy system will improve at that kind of situation, and we'll see more North American rookies, because it's almost appalling, like, how few North American rookies the NALCS has fielded relative to, like, the EULCS or the LPL this past year. There was, like, 2 new rookies in summer or something, whereas you had, like, over 10 in Europe and China. So
yeah, but then again, though, NA recycled the most whack talent ever. They're like, let's give Kiwi Kid his 8th split check. It's like, fuck whoever's involved with that decision. Fuck everything about them. Fuck whoever they associate with as a record label, as a crew. Like, fuck off. Like, what are you doing? Like, that can't possibly... What's the upside of that? Okay, Croissant. Anyway, what I drew you away from there with that sidebar was... So it sounds like you admire the approach that Immortals took in how they constructed the team, how they rebuilt the team, right? Where's this going? Like, what about their approach could in some way tie into this point as perhaps an example or something you think so positive for the West?
So the reason I brought it up was because a lot of people might think that's gone, and it's just like, you know, that would be a huge, like, black hole in the development of the West, or specifically of North America. And I think that the only team that I saw pick up, okay, well, like, there's a lot of different perspectives, and even like you could talk for 10 minutes about one player like Cody Sun, right? And how he fits into 100 Thieves, and how I think that team is going to go. But I think that's a different topic. But to give an example of Clutch Gaming's roster, I think they, like, the kind of scouting and like analytics that they're doing is comparable to what Immortals was doing. And I don't know like how they treat the players, but I think a lot of their decisions might, you can consider them to be better than like.
Do you have any insight into that as to what methods they're using? Because as far as I could tell, first of all, the Clutch Gaming guy just straight up admitted, like, actually, most of the things we tried were experimental and didn't work. And then secondly, I believe he even did sort of say, like, yeah, it's a lot of advanced things and metrics. And then it's like, like once they sort of like strapped him in the fucking interrogation chair, he was like, VODs, we watch VODs. It's like, come on.
Yeah, exactly.
So come on, if you know more than me, Croissant, come on, let me know. Is there anything I'm missing out on here? Is there some shrewd element that they're doing here?
So they just picked up Apollo, Hakuho, and then Lyra. So they think, I think.
So they picked up Envious, right? Yeah, that's one advanced method. Okay.
It's really important to have that core of 3 that like any successful team needs to have that. And the fact that they like believe in the bot lane NA talent, and that's probably the best NA bot lane they could have picked up, in addition to Lyra, who is a question mark because I don't know like what his conditioning has been like or what kind of practice he's gone through since we've last seen him. But that already seems really, really solid to me. And I'm looking at this from a perspective of like how much money do they have to spend as well, right? So I don't think that they're picking that. I'm not saying this roster is the one that will win North America and will also like win like or like make a splash at Worlds, but the thought that goes into developing roster that is affordable for them and also helps them develop a system and a structure to feed in eventually more like bring in different kinds of players is really promising to me. And I think Forbidden just brings the raises the level of mid lane in NALCS, and that they think that any problems that he might have had like with the coaching staff or with the development in H2K can be solved in their system. And then Solo is like, he particularly has a bad reputation with a lot of players because he was extremely toxic, but he's one of the North American talents that has not actually gotten that, like he's gotten chances in the challenger scene, but so he's the only question mark for me. But I think even though I personally don't like him, I think that it's just these are good decisions to be making. These are the kinds of failures that we want to see coaches making, and then like reassessing, because it's a lot easier to see where you went wrong with that squad and with someone like Solo, and then if you bring someone with a lot of previous experience, and if you brought in like a player that they just do not like, affects the way that they develop as an organization from ground zero.
Okay. See, my joke there would be that the advanced metrics they used, was they set up a lot of actual real life scenarios in which they would be able to test the character of the player. And what they did is, so for example, as the player was on his way to the team house for the trial, they'd set up a hidden camera and there was just a wallet on the floor. And any player that didn't pick it up, they made a little note, yeah, good, honest, represents the values we like. And then also, later on, when the player's on the bus, he's sat on the bench waiting for the bus, someone comes along and starts like bullying a kid next to him, and then the player that's like, hey, leave him alone, he's just living his life. They're like, fuck, see, great teammate, good guy. These players represent the core values and principles around which we have built the team here at the Verizon Buyers Fund. I mean, Clutch Gaming, Houston Rockets franchise. You see what I mean? Anyway, obviously all banter, not really a real point. Now, here's a question I have along these lines then. So, again, you've managed to pick a team that most people don't think's that great, but be impressed in some sense by how they constructed the team. So I actually have a question for you. This is just purely a side topic, since who knows when we'll have you on the show again. But one thing about that team that I am actually a little bit queasy about is, I have to say that the roster's a mixed bag. Like the Apollo Hakuho thing, I get it in as much as if you want to have the two imports, you've got to do NA somewhere. It's an NA bot lane. At least they have played together. I agree in that sense. I don't think it's a great bot lane. I think it's I think it's like the Po Belter of bot lanes. It's pretty decent, but it's not going to be great. It's not going to be terrible.
Like, I think Hakuho is actually maybe he's one of the best NA supports, I think, straight up.
NA
and I think
yes.
Yeah, but I mean,
the most dog shit role in the entire
I would say he's
Yeah.
No. I mean,
Special's
do you
still
think
sitting
that's the
checks.
most dog shit role in the entire region, or the role that literally no one is willing to actually field an North American player on their entire roster? But yeah, I actually think that NA support is not that bad compared to like the European support role.
I'm just saying he's the best looking stripper in Minnesota. Brilliant.
Yeah, but I actually think I would take Haku over Biofrost, for example. So
fair play. Okay.
Yeah. And I actually think Apollo is pretty good. Like, I have no problems with their bot lane.
But the point I'm making is, if I'm trying to build the best team, okay, that's like a bit questionable. We'll see where the others go. The solo one, I agree with. Let's give someone a chance. And in fact, actually, the fact that they've had these issues and that's why they didn't have a chance, in a weird way, counterintuitively, makes them worth a chance now. They might actually be much better than the lack of experience shows. And then when you look at the recruits, okay, I like the imports. Lyra's obviously very good. Admittedly, haven't seen him on a very good team, which is certainly a knock, you have to say. Secondly, you have Febervern, who has been a pretty good player and luckily now has been through enough ups and downs, probably has his identity set. So I think the lineup's not bad, especially in the context, as Croissant said, of, you don't know how much they had to spend. My question comes with their hiring of a coach, because this is exactly where I feel like that whole thing of like, we want to represent our values is like, that's where it goes out the window for me if you hire the coach, because the person they hired as a coach, D. Lim, was the guy who you may remember. People who don't care about the bottom of LCS, okay, might not know that he was like a coach for Team Liquid, but you will remember him from the Team Liquid documentary Breaking Point. He was the guy who they brought in, like, my derogatory way to say it would be, he was the guy doling out all the hugs. He was the guy who came in after like a really heated moment between like fucking Loco Doco and Steve Arneset and Dardock, and then or Piglet, and he would come in and he'd be like, "What up, homie?" Like, and bring him in, and like he was like the friend, and he was the guy. Come on, man, let's all just calm down. The problem with that is that guy might, who knows, maybe he has amazing analytical skills, but I worry about people like that, especially since he then, in his tenure later, had some dog shit teams. Didn't matter how good the players were; some of them were fucking terrible. Admittedly, they had some bad players as well, but I wonder how someone like that will do coaching a team like this, because maybe he's going to be the breakout. Maybe this is his moment. Maybe this is his revelation. I worry about that personally. I don't know that the coaching pickup was the right one.
Yeah, and I probably do. Like, of the roster pickups, David Lim is maybe my biggest question, because my understanding is that he got a huge boost from being able to speak Korean and English, and then he was like kind of a bridge coach between like two parts of the staff. So I'm not sure like what the rest he's capable of. So maybe he really rises to the occasion here, but like that would be my main question on the roster. I think in general though, like, so the whole thing with Clutch Gaming and having advanced metrics is that like basically this was something Riot wrote as something that Clutch Gaming put in their application that they wanted to eventually bring to the table. But the stuff with the scouting is basically, we watch all major region solo queue. Wow. Like, this is mind-blowing stuff, because, like, I say this in almost a mocking way, but teams don't do that. They just don't. It was
actually
watch.
A mocking way in some ways, you would say. Not
I mean, it was, because it's like, it's both revolutionary and not, because teams just, like, stopped watching NA solo queue or stopped watching to sort of look for and contract talent. The other issue, though, is that there are a lot of teams that came forward and said that we're going to be doing this more. We have all of these sheets based on like every single player ranked on the NA ladder, on this ladder, and everything of that nature. And we've been planning on this and working on this for months. But then they come forward and they say, we want to build this team, and these are like some of the players that were picked. Then the org owners are still, I'm not naming which teams or anything, they're still going and being like, what's his social media following? Has he played at Worlds before? Like, where is my branding? And then so all of this work they do is almost useless. And so the rosters come out with like, I don't know. Again, I'm not naming any names to implicate anyone, but yeah.
So, okay, let's bring this back to the topic then of recruitment. So, okay, that was just an example that you gave there, Croissant, because you liked the fact that there was a logic to it and there was a rationale of how they built it. Now, first of all, obviously, there have been some very dark times in the last couple of seasons of NLCS where people have literally made teams that are like, here's some players. Okay, what's the logic? No, these are some players, do something with it. Like, there's the ridiculous lineups like that, like the old NRG lineup I always reference from Season 5. And then, obviously, Actually, no, it would be season 6 spring.
Yeah, season 6.
And then, to me, the other way you do it, which is also just as bad in its own way, refers back to the recycling talent. And I would actually give as an example here, obviously great theme, bearing in mind the team we just talked about, Clutch Gaming, I would give Renegades. Because even though I know Renegades didn't have loads of money and they weren't in a position to like outbid everyone, when they made that lineup, the one they had for LCS, with like Croms and Alex H and Freeze and like, who was the top, like RF Legendary and Maria. Now, when they made this lineup, the way that lineup went is, in my opinion, from following sports in LCS, this is actually the worst position to put yourself in. It's where every player, you sort of go like this. I guess he could be good. Okay, let's see what the next player is. That could work. Alex, he used to be good. Crumbs, I could see that working. And the problem is, at the end of the roster, you go, wait a minute, where's the actual good players? Like, we've just compromised on every player, and we've sort of said, like, maybe they could be good. And really what we're sort of saying is, if that's sort of like, one of the worst players in the team, we're probably going to be all right. These are all just, they're sort of all the worst and best players. Fuck, we're actually going to be mediocre, aren't we? And I have to say, by the way, just because, like, I am known to toot my own horn in many ways, I did, in fact, when I was looking at this lineup, say as much to Monty, like, I don't say publicly you're going to do well, because I'd have to go ahead and say you're probably going to be like 6th at best, And on top of that, I'll just put this out there because I'm a piece of shit, but I did actually tell Monty before they'd ever even played LCS games, I'm going to go ahead and say, if you can possibly replace that Maria character, I would, because I actually anticipate perhaps some sort of personality conflicts within the team, which mean it might not work. Now, I don't want to seem like some sort of prescient individual. I don't know that was necessarily the hardest sort of off-ramp to spot on the highway, I'm just saying I did call it. But anyway, you can see what I mean. That sort of a team is like a classic NALCS move where the lower level teams just pick up the Kiwi kids of the world and just keep recycling the talent. So, okay, is there something here that we can put forwards, Croissant? Is there some rationale that can be implemented that would improve this kind of recruitment beyond, as we say, once again, the old phrase, everything old is new again, the revolutionary approach of actually watching solo queue? Beyond that, what can we do? Like, for example, are you someone who buys into the philosophy that we addressed before of like, get a really good coach and then give him the power to pick the team?
So how do you change the very nature of recruitment? I think that the academy teams they really have to be utilized in the way that sister teams in Korea were used in the past. And I think that's the best way for talent that has been acquired to incentivize these teams to pick up more and more of that talent into their academy teams, and for recruitment to be a viable way to replace players on the team currently in the starting position. But when you guys say that the scouting exists, I'm not suggesting that teams watch NA solo queue or that that's a novel concept, but I think when
a lot of that was facetious, but
yeah. I think when Riot put out those statements for the 10 teams and did a little blurb for each of them, when I looked through Team Liquid's tried to look through as much as I could of their proposal to join the LCS, I think that when Clutch Gaming was known for having already put together one of the largest scouting teams, that it wasn't just we watched 3 or 4 VODs of each region and we understand League of Legends. I think that there are a lot of ways that you can scout players that I don't necessarily know how to implement yet, but with some studying of how do NBA teams pick up talent? How do their drafts work, and how do they look at the statistics, and how do we translate that into league? I think that a combination of those mathematical and computational approaches with just a understanding of, these are your star players who will always show up because they you don't need to fix their mentalities, or you don't need to fix something that's wrong with them. They just have the X factor. When you combine those two approaches, I think that it's really hard to go wrong, and it's really hard to end up with a mediocre roster, if that makes sense.
I just don't think that there will ever be like a statistical shortcut to recruitment, and we've gone into detail in discussing like why in separate episodes.
I mean, technically there could be if we actually do live in a computer simulation, because in that logic, if we could access the simulation level, then we could find the data and the code and then read it. But I agree with you, on actual reality level, put it this way, if someone can do it, fair play, you win the Nobel Prize for figuring out League of Legends.
There are certain techniques that you can apply in machine learning to like take account for all sorts of things, from like item builds to everything else, but it's just really difficult to, because you need someone who's able to implement that kind of thing and also like look at the code in a way and understand the game and understand where it's going wrong. And so I don't necessarily know if there's like the kind of people in the scene right now who are capable of doing that. And it's going to be a really long time before something like that is even like a possibility.
By the way, as a side point to this, because people might now be thinking, if they followed the wider tech world, oh no, wait a minute, what about this AlphaGo program, which is learning Dota 2 and it's learning Go and you know, there was the old Deep Blue that learned chess. By the way, if you ever want to look into that and not just be a fucking pleb reading the New York Times, look into that topic and you will find so much fuckery surrounding every one of those programs that, like, put it this way, it would be incredibly revolutionary if they had made a computer that did what they claim, which is not just beat someone, but learn how to beat them and essentially learn the game without being trained all the elements and then learn adapt to new situations. If they could do that, that would be so revolutionary. It would be like equivalent to like meeting aliens on the White House lawn. It would be that incredible. Now, the reason why I'm saying like that's not really what they're doing is every one of those examples of them beating like super godlike players in these games always comes with the players themselves, not just out of like sour grapes, saying things like, but in this particular game where suddenly it started beating me, there was a very weird thing where, for example, it seemed as though a human had interacted between the games and updated something or added in something, which is exactly, remember, what the marketing tells you they are not doing. The marketing tells you it is learning itself, because actually it's still very, by the way, the stupid thing about that is it's still very cool to have a computer program that can beat the best player in Go or Dota 2 or whatever. It's just that you're completely lying and it's bullshit if you claim otherwise. So just a sidebar, just a rant there, because I'm not going to get that out of my system anywhere else. You know, it's not of any relevance, actually. It was kind of like my version of Kelsey's sort of awkwardly crowbarred in Bitcoin analogy earlier in the show. So now we know that Kelsey's been reading about Bitcoin recently. So anyway, Croissant, you have any thoughts on this?
Thoughts on the...
It was more about the metrics and how you can do it, because you sounded like, much like many young people of your ethnicity and cultural background, like you're all about that tech shit and you're into computers and we're going to solve everything using computers. Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, go take this guy to Mars.
Yeah. So maybe I'm a little bit too optimistic about innovation, and I don't want to seem like I'm trying to sell clutch gaming. I was just using that as an example of, you know, what I thought was a standout method
put it this
of
way,
recruitment.
do you actually think this though? Because I know there's a lot of people getting into esports who are like experts in statistics or mathematical models, and what they're trying to do is, they haven't necessarily found them yet, but they're searching for, you know, like special metrics or certain, like, you know, sort of sweet spot Goldilocks zone areas in stats which would yield something. Are you actually someone who has the optimism that thinks like, you know, if not now, then a year or two, 5 years from now, you know, we'll start to get actual real results from this?
Yeah, and the reason I think people think that, so one example is Oracle's Elixir. It's existed in its current form, and it like has changed slightly, but one program that, so I feel like I would have a lot better understanding of these if I actually worked with like the specific kind of developments that some of these statisticians are trying to make. But Tim, who works for who made Oracle's Elixir, he has this program that supposedly gets all these statistics and like reviews your games, and he like tries to sell it or market it to the teams, and each of the team, like supposedly a lot of the teams buy into it and use it for like a certain amount of money every month or whatever. But again, I don't know how useful each of those specific things are, and like how does the scene really change if every single person or every single team picks up that kind of technology, right?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's obviously useful in as much as League is such a fucking terrible game that you don't have the replays and you can't pass this data yourself. So yeah, it obviously has a baseline value.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you're saying, it's not the same as having a specific model that you created yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's, I've looked at that too a little bit because I've talked to Tim, but I think there are some things in it that are useful, but they're like kind of a small percentage of it. And obviously he's worked on updating it. And that's just the nature of it in general, is that there are so many statistics that are like niche useful for talking about and usually need to be supplemented by actually watching the games anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge problem with the statistics that are available now. And
those are statistics that I think, like, I just in between studying and like trying to do other work, that when I do get a chance to play the game and like try and study like, oh, what's going to be the new meta, I've always done a very shoddy job of, okay, I'm looking at statistics from these 3 sites and I'm trying to make like conclusions based off of it. And it's just, I've never, fully relied upon that, but I think that it is just a tool that I would be very, very ignorant not to use and not to like try and utilize in my developing my analysis. And I think that although I don't perfectly understand what kind or how to implement certain technology, like Clutch Gaming having a quantitative analyst who previously worked for like investment banks, and the Medium post that he wrote, and it's the only piece of content that Clutch Gaming has put out other than Sebastian like going on and like doing interviews and talking about the like special metrics that they use. But that was a really clear example of Lyra, like they developed something to track jungle pathing and like optimal routes. And that is something that I could see, like if Lyra makes the optimal decision, like even 10% or even like 5% more than all the other NALCS junglers. And I don't see any problems with his ability to work with me and like for me to teach him the things that statistics and all these other things can't, that there's no reason for me not to pick up that player. And I think that that kind of technology is implementable, and I don't know how much further it can go beyond like me giving me a rough idea of which players to pick up. But I think that's where the technology is best suited for right now.
I thought that the program had they only said a theoretical application was like calculating the optimal jungle route, because I don't think they actually succeeded in doing that yet. So I would be very surprised if they had, for a variety of reasons. Because
so the
I think
secret is, if these guys ever figure it out, I'm just going to get AlphaGo to figure out how to make a better team, and I'm just going to beat them. So fuck them. They can't beat me. Quantum. I'm going quantum, baby. Okay, I'm
obviously, there are a lot of ways that you can use math and statistics. Like you can break down the patch. You can look at certain things about like pick ban that people are using. You can even like look at games observationally and track like behaviors of junglers and then put these through and come with like some kind of like average path over time. So, but it's just, again, something that will tell you over several patches, over several champions, over all of these sorts of things. Like if this guy is making consistently optimal decisions, it's just really difficult because of how many different scenarios you would need to simulate in this type of situation. And then like in order to program the computer to simulate these situations, you either have to have the program learn itself, or you have to have someone who is able to like enter all of these simulated scenarios and like the optimal choice into the program.
Yes.
Initially. So it's just like, for me, this is a very difficult thing to get to right now.
Well, the funny thing is, what you've essentially done there is cut to the conclusion of the real reason why Thorin is incredibly skeptical that this computer program is learning to beat all these people in these games. Because here's the problem, right? Just think about it rationally. Yes, there are basic fundamental rules to all of these games. But simply knowing the fundamental rules is not why the best players of all time win the game. They have a special talent. Now, let's imagine that somehow you could... The reason why games like Go and chess are actually the best examples is because they don't have a mechanical component except your brain. You know, you have whatever time you have to make the decision, and then in theory, if you had unlimited time and as a result processing power, you could always make the optimal decision. The problem is, that sounds like you've now arrived at your destination. You have not. You have now got all of your work ahead of you, because the question becomes, what the fuck is an optimal decision? There is no perfect optimal decision in most of these games. That's why genius players players exist. They are geniuses. They come up with not the optimal decision, but a better decision than me. Therefore, they beat me. They don't beat, some all-time perfect creature which shows that they're the best ever. So the problem becomes, wait a minute, who's programming this computer? Well, unless it is some of the best players ever, or someone who has gotten such an amazing read on the fundamentals of the game, they just lack the processing power themselves to execute them, I don't see how it would ever be possible to actually make these programs do what they claim, personally. So I get, it's a similar scenario you're kind of outlining here. Even if you could do all these things and have this program, well, who is the person who decides the optimal jungling path? Because I'm pretty sure even if we sat down Lyra and fucking Bengi and Score, between the three of them, they wouldn't agree on what the optimal paths necessarily are in certain cases,
And there is almost machine learning type technology that's being developed that actually figures this out itself, and it figures it out very quickly because it can calculate a bunch of different scenarios. But and people have sort of discussed applying this to League. It's just a very difficult thing to do, and even get to where you would come out with meaningful applications for it, because they published their whole thing, which was okay, this is the we're able to simulate all of these different scenarios, right? In theory, is what they're talking about. But then you get to the point where it's okay, so what is the specific application of this? Is it simulating if my player is building Giant's Belt in this scenario, will the outcome what is the probability that this will win this fight, or something like this? What exactly are you using as an application, and how easy is it to alter the program for these different scenarios, and how accurate is the result? The accuracy of the result is something that I don't know they can reliably test, and that's really my question on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right, well, we've discussed a lot, so here's the thing. We can either just end it there on that note, or if you have a last topic within this context you want to discuss, let me know. Do you? It doesn't matter if you don't know. If you do, just let me know.
Within the context of recruitment, or
no, just the whole broad topic. Did you have anything? Is there something key we didn't get to? I mean, we are just doing free consulting for all these cunts who have millions of dollars in all these teams. But sadly, that is the world we live in, I'm afraid. Maybe one day, this won't even be a public show on YouTube. We will literally just have a traveling show that we go, much like selling snake oil, and we'll just go, and then we'll just perform the show for Steve Arnesen and other such baller, billionaire type guys at that point in time, and then get paid handsomely for it.
I mean, there is, the entire esports consultancy industry where people just get paid for saying stuff without even proving credentials, so...
And that is my motherfucking job. Anyway, no. Do you have a final topic, Croissant?
I would just go more into NA solo queue and stuff, but I don't think it's super, super interesting.
No, you're right. That should probably be a video. Yeah. Okay,
I
we'll
think,
just leave it actually. No?
Actually, there's one last thing that I think is interesting to bring up, which is people have discussed the impact of the marketing aspect on North America's competitiveness as a region. I think there's an interesting thing to bring up when you have organizational owners who almost flat out say, we're more interested in brand building and building this kind of culture and a fan base than we are in winning. And then they turn around and say, our team will never win. Okay. So I was wondering, in this context, because I feel there's almost more of the sense that teams emphasize, I'm not saying North American teams don't want to win Worlds, and TSM certainly does, and has geared a lot of certain things and cut out a lot of marketing things that they could for their players to focus on being competitive. So this isn't a be-all end-all, but I was wondering if the top-down message of branding and marketing has an impact, because I think it has, certainly in China. And organizations will even say that there was an issue with importing players specifically for streaming, and setting up players for streaming, and streaming having so much money that impacted their results and the culture and the climate to an extent. So I was wondering if anyone feels especially with the addition of franchising, that this is an issue with the North American law environment.
Go Croissant. What do you think?
So that was one of the topics that I was thinking about for this show, but just how is Chinese franchising and having a team be based in Shenzhen and all these different cities going to affect even other regions? are China just going to absolutely dominate if the money that is going into China is like there was the bubble before, right, where Chinese teams were buying Korean players, but the wealth would be much more real and much more like substantive this time than it was last time, I think, with like the actual franchising system. And you know, the top-down approach, if it convinces more and more players to join these teams and become streamers, which I'm not sure what kind of arrangement that would be, but not be pro players anymore and go for that kind of career, then it would just like, it would make a lot of talent disappear from the scene in a sense. But I think that if that talent was going to these teams because as a player, they had like the opportunity to stream on the side and make a lot of money and get a huge fan base, that it would attract more and more talent to North America and to these teams that have focused on brand building. And then as a result, North America would be more competitive. And then maybe one day all the Korean players who want to come here will help North America win Worlds. But I'm not sure exactly what the system you were talking about in China or how that works.
I mean, what I meant was like years ago when they were, a lot of people thought that the Koreans were being imported to the Chinese teams because the Chinese teams legitimately thought like this was the best way to win. A lot of it had to do with streaming company sponsorship, and streaming companies like subsidized a lot of these Korean importing because they wanted the Korean players to play for Chinese teams and stream on their Chinese streaming platforms. So I think that's like, I think that kind of idea was part of what hit the competitiveness of the LPL region for a while, was like this kind of streaming bubble and this emphasis on marketing and money and commercialism. So I was wondering, because I feel like NA has done similar things, and I wanted to know if people felt like this had an impact, or is there just like other more far larger fit issues? Because for one thing, like aside from Power of Evil's huge PR disaster, I've almost never heard a European player like legitimately say they're going to North America to get on a better team, just flat out. So,
well, here's the thing. First of all, you have to put this in the context that actually this is one of the areas in esports that NALCS teams shit on Korean teams. It's actually knowing how to market and get outside sponsors and budgets. Because by the way, if you ever look into how Korean teams are actually structured, so when we say SK Telecom, what the fuck does that actually mean? Well, first of all, it's not SK Telecom in the sense of like, that's SK Telecom's team and will always be SK Telecom's team. There were teams in the past who were in these positions who were owned, and actually other teams came in and became the owner of the team. It's really sort of like a white label approach, almost of like, oh, well, we have a team. Would we like you? For you to be our team? I know it was the same when I worked for Team Acer. They weren't literally working under Acer. They had a budget from Acer, and basically that was covering all the marketing. So first of all, Korean teams are not these masters of sponsorship that naive Westerners imagine. Like anyone who thinks that, like, why wasn't Samsung paying more? They're a huge company. Because that wasn't Samsung. It wasn't Mr. Samsung. Like, oh, hello, Samsung here. I'd like to pay my Koreans a lot because they're good at legal. No, what the fuck are you talking about? No, it wasn't. It was just a very small division of them. So first of all, there's that. Whereas actually, if you look at what people, I mean, it's even more prominent before the era of venture capital. You look at what people like TSM and like Cloud9 were able to do. What a fucking amazing job these guys were doing in terms of business, bringing in sponsors. And part of it was, unfortunately, this element that drew away from competitive, of having players who stream, are entertaining when they stream, have personalities, have Twitter followings, have big social media, do AMAs, show off their personality. These aspects were how, this is why I give massive credit to the West. NA was able to make as much or more money than the best region at the game without being even vaguely the best region. And not even, by the way, by having the most viewers. They didn't. So what was incredible at this was, in that area, that's why it's hard to bring this part and integrate it into being competitive, because they've essentially succeeded in a way the other ones didn't. So you can't just say, well, just just like do what TSM tried to do in season 6. Just don't do any of those things that made us really successful. No, that's not a solution, is it? Like, you got to find some compromise between the two. But secondly, I would say this. The part where I saw that as very negative was where it clearly did play into. That's one of the reasons why motherfuckers like Kiwi Kid were on these teams. Let's be real. Because they had followings and they had personalities. And also, by the way, on a very simple level, they had Twitter followers. Like, I've heard players say that team owners rather say, yeah, this player was slightly better, this Korean player, but why would I sign him? He only has 10k Twitter followers and he doesn't ever interact with his fans. So I don't get engagement with my fans. I can't then sell the engagement to sponsors. It's not a good look for my team. Now, this is one area where I already have a solution for these guys because it actually comes from another game. In CSGO, we have a player who's a legendary in-game leader, a captain. His name is Zeus, right? And he is a Ukrainian player. And about 7 years ago, he was the captain of the best team in Counter-Strike. They won all the majors, all 3 in 1 year. And ever since then, he's still been a very good leader. But the problem is, because he's from Ukraine, and even in contrast to other people from the CIS region, he has very limited English because he's just never bothered putting in a lot of effort to learning it. And he's just one of those people who's only associated and socialized with other people from the CIS region. Therefore, he speaks Russian and some Ukrainian. That's it, right? He's never put in any effort. Well, he has become one of the most popular players in CSGO. And he hasn't changed anything about what he does in the game. What they did was his team, quite cynically, I can't remember if it's his team or him, just hired someone who was an American kid to run his Twitter account. And what the kid would do was, half the time he wasn't even literally translating. He would just think up a funny meme and he would just tweet it out. And then sometimes, if it was a really serious topic, he would consult the player and say, what do you actually think about this? Like, what should I say? Or aside from that, he just did jokes. So for example, while the player would be playing in the game, like there was a moment where the player like died in a Molotov and the Twitter account itself tweeted that moment, like some meme, like lol, that bad decision, like, oh shit, like some little kid running away type meme, They were doing shit like that. Now here's the maddest part about this. It had a two-pronged effect. One, it made him very popular, despite the fact some people knew it wasn't him doing it. But here's the maddest part. Even when people like me told the whole world constantly, he is not the one on that Twitter account. That is not him. I don't respond to his account because it is not him. I do not care about talking to an 18-year-old American kid. That has no relevance to me. I'm not going to interact with that account personally, as in, when I would reply to a pro player or something. Even knowing that, people liked it. But even worse, a lot of people to this day still don't think of that. Because what happens is they look at the Twitter account and they go, that's Zeus, he's tweeted something, probably Zeus, and they never do it because the problem is it adds an extra layer of abstraction, right? It's a bit like, for example, during the last election, right? Okay, so for all the people who critique Donald Trump on his Twitter account, if you think Hillary Clinton ran her Twitter account, you're out your fucking mind. Like when she made that joke that was like, delete your account. In no universe did Hillary Clinton sit down and go, I understand memes and the way 4chan interacts with the internet. Here would be a hilarious moment to show what I'm down with the kids. No, some fucking intern came up with that and tweeted it. And it was straight fire. But Hillary Clinton didn't tweet it. But you know what? All analysis of the impact and the implications of the tweet were as if she had tweeted it. So here is the simple solution. You get someone like Lyra, you get someone like whoever it might be, Deft. You now have someone run their Twitter account, make funny comments, generally try and get a feel of their personality and maybe give some of that on there. You also, by the way, have a social media manager whose job is, at the events, to tell Deft or to tell Bjergsen, please upload a photo now from the green room before we go out to the games to your Instagram and tweet out that you have got a new picture on you. You do these very simple things and no joke, you could literally have all the competitive qualities you want without compromising any of your marketing and media. And it actually wouldn't even cost very much. It'd be fairly cheap when you consider how much money there is to hire one of these people. So basically, I am cynical as fuck.
On a similar line, like I watch some of the Korean player streams on Huya or like Chinese platforms sometimes. So like KT obviously has a big Chinese fan base because a lot of those players played on top LPL teams.
Sure.
So like I was watching Mata's stream and he has like a translator there to translate everything he says, but this guy almost like never talks, right? So effectively you go to his stream and you're listening to his Chinese Korean translator talk. Like she'll be like flirting with the chat and all this other stuff, and then they'll be asking her like where she lives and all this stuff, and so she basically becomes like the pseudo entertainment celebrity
he's
value.
the straight man, right?
And then he just like sits there and practices the game and stuff, and every once in a while he says something she translates. It's like actually pretty interesting. And Apto, I guess, like had a situation before like this broke down where he had like kind of a funny relationship with his translator, and then his translator became like a celebrity in his own right and gained her own like reputation and things like that. So I think that that's an interesting element to explore as well.
Okay. I mean, I'm obviously just spitballing there, but to me that would be an obvious way to bridge the ground. Now, I know why they didn't do it before, because first of all, you know, maybe that stuff, like people don't know this, but actually the way that teams like TSM were run, because of salary inflation, it eventually got so that by like season 5 and season 6, they weren't that wealthy actually, like, you know, relative to how much they had to spend on the org. That's the reason why they had a lot of problems with coaching stuff. They couldn't just hire 5 guys. I mean, that sounds like I'm saying the fucking burger people, but you know what I mean? Like, they couldn't hire a whole team of people. And so back then, it probably wasn't reasonable to tell someone to get a fucking Instagram guy. But at this point, it actually would be worth it, especially if you then could simultaneously, as a result of that, have the best team and win and caught the fans, and therefore have essentially Korean-style success in the game, but Western-style success outside of the game with marketing. So I think, to me, that's an obvious thing you should do, whereas before, yes, you just picked the people who naturally had an affinity for that and had already built up these user bases. But put it this way, as I say in the case of the Zeus guy, you should never again have to hire a Kiwi kid, because if you have a good player, therefore, you know, he's compelling to follow because he's good, and you have someone who knows what they're doing with social media, you could easily overtake Kiwi kids' fucking follower numbers in like a year and a half or something if you really put your effort in.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Is that it? Do you have any thoughts on this, Croissant?
No, I just think that was a really effective way to maintain competitiveness, but also
not bad, right?
increase fan engagement.
How many Twitter followers do you have?
400.
Step your motherfucking game up.
This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.